about yourself?
I'm all right, Matt. Nice to see you. I'm
Nice to
here
see you
in
too.
lovely Toronto, Ontario, in front of a green screen in case anybody wants to put me where I belong. The Balloonatic Asylum is the place I've escaped from temporarily for this interview.
Well, it's nice to see you out in common populace. I suppose in greener pastures would be the one I'd say.
Yeah. I was gonna wear an orange shirt and be like, I'm an Irish flag, but hey.
Well, there's a few with the green and orange. You might be able to do a selection of flags.
Yeah, it's true too. It's all orientation kind of thing.
Exactly that. And so, Sean, if people don't know, what would you say you're known for?
Yeah, well, different circles, different stories, but among the streets community, I would be. My first manifestation was Balloony Rooney, who was a unicycle riding, balloon twisting guy. Uh,
Yep.
that would have been way back in the late 80s.
Wow.
I
Okay.
technically innovated at that time. I went from being a competitive Rubik's Cube kid to being like a balloon guy who was like, oh, this is mathematical and physical, and I will apply mathematical and physical and geometric concepts to this work. And so for a certain period of time, I'm comfortable to say I was the most innovative balloon artist. I took balloons into a dimension that others hadn't, and music, an important dimension of that. And then going from just twisting animals for kids for money to actually doing presentations and shows.
Well, I suppose the thing we should do then is we should go back to the start of the story. Being a musician, being an entertainer, being a creator is not a life that suits everyone. It's not a life everyone chooses. Why did you start walking on that path? Why do you believe you started walking on that path?
No, I mean, part of it's not fitting in anywhere else, right? you kind of, you, I did, I went to university initially studying biology, science, and then I decided, no, I was more literature, and then I ended up doing a degree in cultural anthropology, and there's not much job lined up for that kind of a field. Um, I always had a slight literary bent and musical bent.
And was
Uh,
that something in the family? Was that something
yeah,
that was nurtured?
I come from a family of Irish teachers, so I'm the first Canadian-born kid. Um, my the fellow I was named after was George Bernard Shaw, scholar and an extraordinary wit. Both my parents are capable of dropping culturally rich, funny, human stories. So there was always that. There's also on my father's side, I guess hereditarily, we were bards. It was so even going back to his great grandparents would be the storytellers in that part of Ireland, and I'm sure you know that the Irish storyteller. Once you were actually an official storyteller, there's all kinds of everybody's a storyteller, but the ones who are official, they're actually called Shaughnessis, uh, funny enough. Um, and those are people who have a literature memorized, who are able to do multi-hour performances of well-known stories, word for fucking word.
So it's like a classical. You can swear if you want to swear on here. It's fine. So it's like classical oral history. It's like when we
There's
look at when Homer was
yeah,
originally written and things like this.
yeah. So I mean, as a kid, I was a rather unusual kid, and a lot of it has to do with just being born into a family at that time. I have a much older brother and sister, so there's a 11, 10, 11, and 12, 15-year gap. So when I was five, I had I like to say three sets of parents. I had my older brother and sister, I had my mom and my dad, and then I had my grandmother and my grandfather, who were also storytellers. And I was, let's put it this way, when you're a wanted child, it's one thing. I think I was like, my mom wasn't supposed to have kids. My personal story, but my mom wasn't supposed to be able to have kids after my sister they moved to Canada. They had a whole new beginning. They were set up. And 11 years later, it was like, she's like, what's going on? The doctors, not that I'm a miracle or anything, but something happened that allowed her to have children again. So when I arrived, I had just a lot of attention put on me. I had no peers. I grew up in the country. You know, I had so a lot of adult kind of accompaniment. And I guess this was relevant here is that I was used to being sort of a shining center of attention who is doing something new. And
you're almost like an only child, like an only child.
And then I had a younger brother come along who had like a whole other. He's an ecology professor who's like quite well known in his community for theoretical ecological modeling of food webs and nutrient cycling and sustainable biodiversity and stuff. And I think a lot of that comes from growing up in the country, surrounded by animals, and having a library in the basement and cultural conversations at a very high level. You know, our joke, I'd bring friends out to our family and dinner would be food, and then 2 to 3 to 4 to 5 hours of conversation, depending on how well things went. And so long as you were able to meaningfully contribute, you didn't have to go to bed. You know, and eventually I'd fall asleep and someone would pick me up and do it. But yeah, so I guess my first performance, funny enough, was Irish dance as a grade 2, and then something piano in grade 3. But the first thing that really got me excited about performing was public speaking. Come to think of it, you know,
well, it doesn't surprise me from that environment that you do public speaking. But can you describe how you found yourself doing that?
Well, again, you know, my dad's he's the principal of my private Catholic boys boarding school, to give you an idea. So when I went away to boarding school, part of my regime was I had to listen to my dad addressing the school. And, you know, I'm sure that some kids would have had a horrible experience with that, but I never heard a bad word about my dad. The book on him would be someone parodying him with a pseudo-Irish accent, implying that he's full of hot air, you know, but he'd be a storyteller, but compelling, a sort of fellow who you could drop him in front of an audience and he can extemporize literally for hours, like just go, go, go. And my mom, also teacher in her capacity, who taught at my elementary school, her capacity would be more, I'd say, in the communication. I take after my father in the sense that I can go off on a little bit of a, let's say, a tangent. Sometimes I'm able to bring that tangent back to where I started, but I will do that. Whereas my mother is maybe a little bit more engaged with audience. She specialized in teaching learning disability kids. My father really specialized in teaching precocious, ambitious, imaginative kids.
And so maybe this is the thing that your father, much like yourself, gets caught up in the story, whereas your mother would be more attentive of the people she's telling the story to.
Yeah. And I'd say that too, one of my problems as an entertainer is the desire to go into some sort of explanatory mode. You know, it's one thing to perform something, to maintain that mystery. You know, magic, especially as a discipline, is something that sort of thrives on that it happens in the other person's head as a question or as a challenge or as a you know, some sort of psychological manipulation, almost puppetry of the mind. Where a lot of the stuff that I do, I find is actually more interesting if I'm like, no. You think this is that, but let me show you what it really is, because it's based all on physical principles.
And so your first piece of oratory?
So my first public speech was, I had like I said, I grew up on a farm. And when I was 6 years old, we decided we were going to get some dogs. And the Irish blood in us decided it would be an Irish wolfhound. And fate just went like, okay, here you go. A friend of my older brother's was the son of a breeder. who was retiring, and he wanted, his goal was to find a good home for his favorite dog, who was a stud dog, going to be retired. Um, and he, at the time, now maybe there was some private dog somewhere, but in show, he'd been a Canadian champion, but he was 40 and a half inches at the shoulder. He was officially like the tallest dog in Canada.
Wow.
Hamish, yeah. And wolfhounds, you don't have them alone. They're pack dogs. So we ended up with 2 Irish wolfhounds. He gave us, then he wouldn't take any money. He was like, first of all, he's an expensive dog, but I'm more concerned with finding a good place for him to grow, and an Irish family with a farm, lovely. So he gave also a young female a bitch who hadn't yet come into heat. Funny story. A 2.5 hour drive. I'm getting back to the public speaking. A 2.5 hour drive. My brother and my sister went to pick them up, and basically the fellow had picked a bitch who hadn't come into heat because he was a stud dog, and her having not come into heat would make it a very comfortable thing. And then sometime later at the farm, we'd be able to sequester her during her flowering.
Yes.
Anyway, literally, while my brother and my sister were on the road to Kingston, Ontario, which is a couple hours away, she came into heat. And the drive back was basically my older brother, who was a competitive wrestler, quite a built guy, 190-pound wolfhound on one side of him, who was a stud dog used to doing,
he knows how things work. He knows what that smell is.
That's why he's there.
Yeah.
Female who has just come into heat for the first time. My brother's sitting between the two of them, going, "No, sorry." And apparently, yeah. Wolfhound boners. They got stopped by the cops on the way. But this dog, so imagine knowing as a kid, a 5-year-old kid, knowing this already legendary creature is on his way. Meeting a wolfhound, especially one of his gravitas. He was a wise man, a wise soul, something. So when he came to the farm, it was so simple. We walked him around our property, and he knew that was his. He would never go beyond it without us, but he knew that was his. Should anyone decide to enter it, he would be the first to greet them. Not aggressively, but with a certain presence. Anyway, that dog was truly, you're talking about boy's best friend. I mean, Hamish was my hero, like my protector. I had horses. I'd go riding with the wolfhounds on horses. Horses often don't like dogs, but wolfhounds and dogs and horses they run together. So I had a childhood of this magical, kind of mythical creature as my hero. And when I came out for my first public speaking topic, I researched the pedigree of wolfhounds, the history of wolfhounds, peppered it with anecdotes of his greatness, and kept it funny and interesting. And it ended up being a sort of speech. I won school and region. And
so where did you present this then? What was the format for this?
Initially in grade school in the country, and then you get selected as the school winner, and you go to a regional one, and then I think I went like a couple of levels up, so that would have been my first trying to hold an audience experience. The other ones, kid talent shows are, trying not to, unless you're a prodigy, it's trying not to embarrass people too much. But this was really actually engaging people with stories and perspectives.
Yeah.
It's just, I've always been a talker. I think talking would have been my first natural tendency, and it was apparent at an early age. Yeah.
And so how did that move forward to performing then? Did you go and do theatre in school? Were you part of the theatre kind of crew there?
So I did dabble a little bit, but my high school was a lot about sports and education. I still did public speaking in high school. It was something that was expected of me. Again, with my dad as this known orator, and it was understood that I was never as good as he was. There's sort of that, yeah, you're good, but your dad, he can tell a story and stuff like that. But yeah, I'd say that the transition.
And so, did you feel like you were fighting to get equal footing with him, or acceptance as equal to some extent with him? Was that a drive with you at the time?
There's my dad and I have a fairly great relationship, I'd say, but we can be so intensely verbal that we can make other people uncomfortable. Like my mother, if my dad and I really get into he's a history prof and enormously, his database is huge and his capacity to relate it is also, he's an imposing character. And so when we butt heads, you know what I mean? It's like other people find that level of intensity a little uncomfortable. But for me, it's, there's a lot of love and a lot of respect. And again, I never underestimated the significance that my dad meant so much to his students, that I didn't hear things come back to me about him. If anything, it would be in a bar, 5 years out of high school, and you'd meet like someone, and then their dad was the best teacher I ever had. I remember once, and it's, even as a principal, when he wasn't an official teacher, he'd come in and give lectures. So there's a lot of respect, a lot of similarity. But to your question about the transition to performance, theater is something that I actually wish I'd studied a little bit more. Say, what's what I'm looking for? What's what I'm looking for, Matt? Formally.
Yes. There you go.
Sometimes I meet performers who are schooled in theater, and I'm like, wow, that's just like 101, and I wasn't doing it. Transition. So my transition to performance happened so simply. I make balloon animals. I was really good at balloon animals. I got paid gigs.
Why did you begin making balloon animals?
So literally, my first circus type skill was unicycle riding. Unicycle riding came from the athletic challenge of it. I kind of did like endurance cycling and stuff like that. I got pretty competent on it. I wrote it to classes at university one day. A fellow who ran a semi-volunteer club for, I won't say rejects, but we were not I would have been the cool guy in the club, and that's saying something. You know what I mean? There were a lot of people who were alternative in quite a conservative city, and he sort of provided a little bit of an umbrella for them to be themselves. It was a group called the Laugh Guards. I don't know if anyone else had thought of that before, but he had that name going back, we're talking 35 years. So, and the Laugh Guards, he's London, Ontario's official town crier, and he's got that whole sort of thing. And so you can see a little bit of medieval Renaissance fair jester type costumes, a warehouse of props, and they'd be fixtures in local parades, or children's shelters or Big Brothers things. And you didn't make money working for them, but he'd give you an honorarium, and if you could juggle, you'd be paid, I think, $10 an hour, and if you could juggle and unicycle, you'd get 15. So basically, I right away I was put in a clown costume on a unicycle doing parades. Juggling was not the most interesting thing to me. I identified very quickly the amount of energy it would take to get good. And I went, I've got these other things I'm working on. So I literally, someone gave me a balloon and a little lesson on how to twist it to make a dog. I saw someone else at one meeting put a bubble inside a balloon, and that made me go, what the heck was that? How did you do that? Learned how to do that. And then at some point at home, just goofing around with things, I took that bubble in the balloon idea and I took that bubble out and put it into another balloon and was like, oh, it looks like an eyeball. I was like, oh, I need 2 eyeballs. I was like, oh, I need to put those 2 eyeballs inside another balloon and so that they can move around. Oh, and then I need a nose, Oh, and then I need a way to attach this balloon to another balloon now, because putting a ball inside a balloon takes up a certain amount and you're limited in what you can then do with that balloon. So
this has triggered creativity in you by the sounds of it. You've been shown a few quick things and then suddenly you've started working and seeing the possibilities that are coming out of
there
this.
were a couple of moments that were eureka moments. So, I mean, to give you another idea, I'm a guitar player. I broke a string on my classical guitar. I broke a D string, which is the common one you break. So it's not a high one. High ones I can't replace. Actually, I can now, but I didn't have a substitute string. I'd written a song for someone who is coming over, and I'm a finger picker. And then if you've got a gap in the strings, imagine like you're walking upstairs and one of them is missing. You're just like, whoops, what the fuck was that? Like, even if you know that step is coming, like, just the fact it's not there screws up your pattern. So even having a holder in there that wasn't in the way was good. I could see that in my mind. And I went, oh, a 260, the animal type balloon, wound tightly and stretched, in such a way that I could anchor it into my guitar, became a substitute string.
And this is the same time as you're discovering the building of the models.
This would have been a later wave of creativity. I'd say the first wave of creativity with balloons was the bubble inside the balloon and variations. So I didn't invent the bubble inside balloon. I saw somebody do it. You know what I mean by bubble inside balloon?
Okay. Yeah, so you've got, for example, you've got a sausage balloon and then there's a bubble floating about in the middle of it.
Yeah. So basically you're making a bubble, and by pushing it inside, you're creating another skin around it, and then somehow you're breaking that bubble. The initial way I did it is much different than how I do it now, but that was there. And the let's say the killer app for the bubble inside balloon was the pregnant poodle, which was a risque balloon, but it was basically a poodle with the bubble inside its belly. Or somebody would do like a snake that ate its something. So now, independently, a few other people discovered different variations on this, but I'd say that I kind of ran with it the farthest. So the bubble inside balloon became eyeballs. And then one day I was hanging out with a girl I was seeing at the time, and I'd been practicing a bunch of bubbles, and there were all these bubbles just on the ground. And she said, like, too bad you couldn't join them all together. And I went, oh, I can. And so then I created like a caterpillar, or like, a segment where I take all these bubbles and push them inside another balloon, one after the other. And then it looks a lot like a dildo, to be honest. And I can make fully functional dildos if I apply a few more.
A set of beads.
Yeah. The beads are different. The beads maintain their spacing. This would be more like a ridged dildo. There's
I see.
Different degrees of separation. So you can have beads that have like stretchy parts between them. You can have beads that are quite close together. Then you can have beads that are undulations. The trickiest one would be actually taking a full segment of animal balloon that's not twisted in any way and pushing it inside a one that's of a larger diameter. So let's say a 260 into a 350, or a 660 or a 646, depending on the. So at that point, you can
balloon nerd, everyone. He's a balloon nerd.
Yeah. There you go.
I feel like we're jumping ahead in the story here, but you made dildos at one point out of balloons. This was one of your products.
And see, that's exactly the same process. There's one of the things about balloons is there's this continuum between imagination and reality. There's something that's. I see there's some questions here. Are we supposed to answer those?
You can if you want. It's up to you.
Okay.
It's your interview. If you want to answer the questions, you can do.
Yeah, the clown thing is interesting. So bring me back to my thread there for a second, and then I'll finish that.
So you're talking about we kind of got sidetracked by balloon dildos and other things, but essentially you were talking about the first creative spur you had as a balloon artist.
Yeah. So basically, the key things in this are Rubik's Cube, and it's a very similar process. Rubik's Cube, very big at the time, and no books had been published when I first had one in my hand. Or I think there was some pamphlet going around, like there's something like this. Somebody that was from Hong Kong at my high school came back, and he was able to solve the second layer. And the second layer involves like an algorithm. You basically, you apply this kind of like thing, and you blah 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 blah, and this is how you move one to the other.
If you're wondering why he laughed, there's a lass in the comments at the moment asking to talk more about the dildos.
Yeah, we'll get there. So basically, that's how that all happens. It's I had like a Rubik's Cube idea of how to apply iterative algorithmic things to balloons, and so I experimented, and that experimentation, I think I was one of the first people with that kind of a mind to start fucking around with balloons at the time, and it led to stuff that led to, let's say, the caterpillar, which then goes down to become a dildo. It's multiple layering.
And so we've got the creative process.
Yeah.
One of the things I'm interested in is the presentation at this time. How is it being presented? What's the output here, apart from you just creating it?
Initially, there'd be what balloon twisters called line gigs. You got a bunch of kids, you're going to make a balloon for each kid. Street is where the transition happens. This is why we're talking. So I figured out pretty quickly that twisting balloons for kids in rich parts of Toronto was a really nice way to make money. And it also, advertising for myself and so on.
And it gives you time to practice, I suppose, as well. If you're twisting balloons all the time.
That street performer algorithm, right? If you're out there, nobody's watching, it's rehearsal, right? If you're making any money, it's paid rehearsal, right?
Yeah.
And it's a discipline, and you're practicing being charming, and that's so. Initially, it would be me twisting balloons for a kid and getting money from that kid's parents.
It's kind of transactional.
You start making more complicated balloons, people go, "What the fuck is that?" So I start having an audience of people around me watching me make balloons for a kid. My initial model was not even a hat on the ground. It was a hand-to-hand transaction. Somebody came up to me once and said, "You should put a hat in the ground, dude. Like, other people are watching," right? So at that point, it became interesting because the economics comes into play. If I make a complicated balloon, it can take me 3, 5, 7 minutes. I can twist dogs, like, whatever. I think my record when I mattered, I had a full-on balloon poodle in something around 10 seconds. So not from already blown up. But so basically, I can make, if someone's giving me $1 or $2 or $5 because they're impressed by how fast I twisted it, you can see that making a bunch of dogs is the one that's going to turn out, provided you have an audience.
Churn them out.
Exactly. However, doing this one beautiful butterfly that has a story kind of built into it, it starts as a caterpillar and blah, 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 blah. If I can somehow attract an audience and pass a hat, let's say I'll max out at $10 on that, 10 expected bucks on that butterfly. Occasionally I get a much bigger tip by someone who was a connoisseur and wanted to show me they thought I was not.
But that's dice rolling.
That's dice rolling. So I basically transitioned as a result of noticing I was attracting larger audiences of people and not extracting money from them. Fellow street performers were pointing that out, and so.
And when you say fellow street performers,
yeah,
I feel like there's a certain amount of environmental information that we're bereft of at the moment. So when you're doing it on the street and you're doing a line show or you're doing line work, was there other people busking around you? Were you in a busking spot, so to speak?
So I found a few places that other people really, buskers would say they couldn't work. Um, Again, the initial phase would have been in Tony areas of town, um, where I would establish an alliance with a retailer. Oftentimes, an ice cream. Ice cream was I look for the nice local ice cream place. They would have lineups in summer. It was such an ideal sort of a thing.
And then you're entertaining people waiting for their ice cream.
The ice cream people loved me because I kept people in line engaged. The people who were lining up in Yorkville to buy an ice cream. Oh, and my hat line was, like once I got to performing, this idea of like ice cream was the perfect metaphor for balloons. How long does an ice cream cone last? How much did it cost?
Yeah.
How much joy did it give you? I think
at
least all of those about the same as an ice cream cone, right? And $5 back in the 90s.
There you go, man. But where do the other buskers come into this? Because you can't meet a lot of the buskers working ice cream queues.
So this is kind of cool. So basically, Harbourfront would have been the nexus in Toronto. There's a place called Harbourfront where quote unquote real buskers, and this would have been fairly, it's in the history of modern street performing towards the beginning. I mean, we're not talking the 70s, early flowering. We're talking the early 90s. In Toronto, there was a guy called Johnny Toronto who had the big unicycle show down at Eaton Centre, which was the new tourist trap at the time, and he was killing it. And then down at Harbourfront opened up as another kind of a busker pitch. And so I got to see real circle shows, meet some people, establish some connections. There was an inaugural Toronto Buskers Festival, I think in 1995 or 96. It was actually in my stomping ground, in that place that I was telling you about that normally didn't suit it, but they put on a festival there. So so that became like a really interesting interaction. And because this was it was a hilarious street festival, by the way. They had a big budget. They brought people who at the time were considered to be some of the great street performers in the world, I think.
Was this one of the expo tours? Was this an expo?
No, this is strictly Yorkville Buskers, Toronto Buskers Festival, 1995 or 1996. There's a guy from Hawaii who was a fire spinner. Have you heard about him? Someone knows who this is. Robert.
Oh, 100%.
Brother. Anyway, he was the prima donna street performer. I never knew such a thing existed until this guy. And his hat pitch was the first time I saw someone basically go, "I'm an artist. You should be paying me like Picasso." It was, and it was inaugural street performing festival in Toronto, which at that time was a completely cold, disengaged WASP city. And they tried to do it in the place that was the epicenter of waspiness, and the whole thing did not go over.
What do you mean? Just so people don't know, and people in the future who might not have the cultural context, what's waspiness?
So Toronto, sort of, the joke about Canada would be, Montreal was the city of culture and the city of economics for the longest time, and Toronto was this kind of, from a cultural point of view, a little bit of a backwater because of the waspiness. It was the white Anglo-Saxon Protestant.
So that's what waspy means. It's a description of a cultural group, a cultural and
So Toronto would have been a very staid city, whereas Montreal would have what they call chaleur, warmth. Toronto people wouldn't smile at each other. It's not the most friendly, warm. It wasn't known as a place where artists went. It wasn't,
Would this be like a comparison of Edinburgh and London? Edinburgh is this warm, small, nice city. London is.
Yeah. And Toronto would be London without the actual cultural cred at the time. In other words, in London, I could believe somebody really was going off to something better. In Toronto, at that time, now, it's changed a lot, by the way. Toronto is now much more diverse and vibrant. But so this Street Performer Festival was in '95. My first exposure to stuff. I had a few decently successful shows in that environment because I actually knew that clientele a little bit better.
And so how did you develop a show? Did you develop the show in the queue?
Well, I mean, basically, you have things that are interesting. Actually, a lot of my show development happened by watching a little bit other people's shows. There's a few processes here. So I saw that I needed some kind of a finale that I could immediately advertise to people at the beginning of the show that was sufficiently enticing. And,
as we call it in the trade, the hook.
The hook, yeah, exactly. Yeah. So the bubble inside balloon is already, my pun is balloonistic, like a ballistic setup. You've got a projectile in a tube with pressure. Those sort of, and then you need an aperture. So if I've got the balloon tied, then I just have to break it. Or if I never tie it, if I'm plugging my finger, I just have to position that bubble so that a little bit of extra air pressure behind it is going to propel the little bubble out. So that bubble itself, I can shoot it, a few feet, a few meters, a couple meters up in the air. However, back to that initial idea of bubble inside, balloon inside balloon. If I take that bubble and I add multiple layers around it, it becomes smaller, it becomes heavier, rounder even, and more aerodynamic. And then I can apply force behind it and shoot it higher. And then if I go to a bigger balloon, you can see the kind of the escalation that happens.
And so this basically, when you were doing your cues, you were developing these bits,
so
testing them out, working on them.
There would have been a little bit of that. Basically, again, at festivals and this idea of at Edinburgh, if you can give like the sort of the A buskers and then the B buskers, in terms of pitch sort of thing, there'd be like. For me, already at the beginning, it would have been easy to do that B busker kind of side. I recognized early that this hook and this finale, and then I basically developed this ability to shoot a balloon at 100 miles an hour over up to about a 7-story building, and sometimes catch it, or sometimes give away a souvenir. But that basically became the transition. That festival in Toronto was the first time that I did it.
What was it like when you did it the first time as a
show? So I actually came up with it for a night show. Because following the ball is always, it's a little bit tricky. And at night, if I put an LED light inside it, and my friend was one of the first guys to do glow-in-the-dark hacky sacks, so I got some early LED lights that were all red. So basically I put an LED light inside my Super Bowl to shoot it, and it was very visible. And my first show was cool, but I had people come back from the first show to watch the second show with a bunch of friends.
Let me rephrase the question then. What did your first show feel like?
So the first one was medium, but the second one I did that night was great because a lot of people had brought back their friends and I had an audience, and it was actually one of the bigger audiences of the whole festival. So I felt
Were you happy when you did the first show?
So the first show I'd say would have been, again, there's it's a comfortable transition. At what point was it a show? At what point was it just amplified, doing this and then passing? So I'd say the first, if you're talking about that experience that addicts you to performing, that second show that I did was the first show. The other one was like a rehearsal.
yeah, fair enough. And I take it by the sounds then you had that feeling of this is working. They like it. There was this feeling of it making sense in the moment.
Sure. There's certainly there got to be, and again, it was a very interesting, that led right away. There were some scouts at the Toronto Busker Festival from Halifax. Halifax sort of had a few satellite ones. The first one I did was in Windsor, Ontario, and that was actually a very compelling experience for me because it was the first time I met. Well, the Toronto Festival, I kind of met asshole buskers, but because I was the local guy who could take them out to strip clubs and stuff like that, like, you know, people liked me, and it worked out nicely. Windsor was the first time I had that antagonistic experience that sometimes emerges from
when you say that antagonistic experience. Explain it if you can, just we might not know, or maybe people who listen to this in 100 years' time and have no knowledge of our culture.
Okay, I've got I'd say I have a pretty bird's eye view on this. So obviously, nobody who busks successfully, I don't know, maybe there's a monk somewhere who's transcended his ego, but ego comes into play a lot. And there's a lot of lateral, not necessarily criticism, but eyeball throwing in the community. And at that point in time, I'd say not necessarily more so, but more so. There were a lot of people who saw themselves as pioneers, whose way or the highway, the formula of it. And some of them were exclusive, as though it was like, you know, magicians with a secret. And anyone sort of threatening to get into it, there was like that sense of no way. There were people who did the same act as everybody else, give or take. You know, in the sense of the tall unicycle, you know, for height, fire juggling as your finale, and somewhere there's going to be dancing cheek to cheek. Somewhere there's going to be dropping the fire. Somewhere there's going to be, you know, now I'll throw it back at you. You know, there was a range of lines that you would hear, again, delivered in their own style. I came in with something that was so strange because it was different, but it was also known. Everybody knew what this place for balloon animals was and who's this guy.
So it's over there somewhere on the corner.
That's it. What the fuck are you doing thinking that you belong up here on the big stage? And it was funny because that particular festival sowed the seed for me getting out of street performing a few years later pretty quickly. Like I have gone back to it at different points, and you know, we met at Edinburgh.
We talk about that later, yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I mean, so basically, I would say I was traumatized by Windsor Busking Festival. There were.
Do you want to go into it a bit more into some of the instances?
So there was. I mean, I don't mind naming names here.
It's up to you.
There were performers who had an aesthetic that was driven by making money, and it was very clear. And they saw their right to make money as enabling them to behave like complete assholes, to be honest.
And how did their assholeness?
So I had people complaining that I would get a certain pitch at a certain time, that they should be the ones having the big pitch because they're the ones with the big show. And one fellow in particular, he was a talking mime. And on one level, I had to have a raw admiration for his chutzpah. Like, he literally, you know, had the loudest sound system, the gariest costume, and the biggest promise. And also the most absolutely relentless hat pitch. It was 5 minutes minimum, and sometimes it went to 10. Okay? It was exactly this. You know, 3 elements of street performing, you know, build, maintain, and then extract money. He was like Superman on this, and this part sucked so fucking much, but somehow it was just so in your face, and you know, anyway. But I got serious like this from that guy with my little show.
What do you mean by this? What do you mean by moving? So again, people who may just listen to this, moving your arms in a shoulder bargey kind of way.
To be honest, the Windsor Festival that year was the first one. It was in a casino place. People where we were set up were only interested in gambling. I performed because I worked in Macau a lot. It's like casino types are not really interested in your song and dance, let's just say. Excuse me, I'm on my way to having real fun. So the only people who were really successfully establishing audiences were what I would call the hardcore, you know, here I am, everybody.
Hype shows.
The hype shows, exactly. The loudest and the whatever. And so also nobody's really making any money. So that puts that extra kind of pressure on people to compete for what they consider to be great pitches. And
were people verbally nasty to you?
So
were they explicit in their shoulder bargey nature? Because I know that on pitches sometimes people can just be a little bit shitty with you, and it's their way to try and get you to fuck off.
There were a few people who were, but it all comes around. There's here, I'll mention him by name, Jim. Anyone know Jim Smirk, Jim Show? So does that name
It's been mentioned a number of times in the interviews, yes.
So I will try to, I wonder if anyone can hook him up. Jim, for me, is something special. I have utmost admiration for him, not only as a performer, as a human being. Jim was at the Windsor Festival. He was nice to me. And I also looked at his show and I went, damn, he was like one of the people who had big audiences, but wasn't a hype show. He was a charmer. Jim was a charmer. So imagine this slightly traumatic experience on the warm-up or the general thing, the street performing side of stuff. But because it was an inaugural street show or street festival, it had all kinds of sponsors. We had Labatt's Beer as one of the big sponsors. And one of the things that was arranged as a sort of a sub-clause was that there would be an evening of busker performances at a comedy club, Yuck Yucks, in Windsor. And very interestingly, we all had to go up and do our little bits. So that was, for me, the gem of the Windsor one, the reason sort of why I got out of street performing later. So Jim Smirk Show was hosting it. He was fantastic. Everybody else basically sucked.
Why?
They were painful. Well, you're in on an intimate show in a club where everybody's there to see you. You've got a microphone in front of you. And you're going to be like, hey, everybody, you want to see my show? I'm going to show you the most amazing thing you've ever seen. Sorry, you better have something you can deliver that's charming and not make people want to cover their ears. And if you don't actually deliver anything funny, like a laugh is different from lines that work because you're in your environment triggering a response. Okay? This is a different environment. It's a different clientele. And they're actually here to see you. So I can even feel myself right now, for instance, like I shifted into that larger than life persona. There's a moment for it on a stage, but you have to tone down and you have to think. And so the same thing that worked against them, made them smaller on a stage, actually ended up making me bigger. And my expectations had been so low, like even sort of in the lining up, setting up the lineup, they put me last. The festival organizer had sort of identified me as not a desirable one because of her evaluation of the crowd sizes and people talking, who knew her and stuff. So there's a whole little thing. And I think it got to the fourth or the fifth act, and it was, again, only Jim in doing the things between was really keeping it together. I mean, I might be exaggerating. There might have been something moderate, but it certainly wasn't going on.
I can assume what you mean is there's lots of people going out there and trying to clap and cheer and work an audience which is already ready to see you do stuff.
Yeah. And Jim insisted that I go on at a certain point, and the festival organizer was like, why him? And Jim was like, trust me, he'll be fine. So it was just one of those things where I had I put a little bit of thought into what I was going to do. I had some funny lines that had been lost otherwise, but there is something that happens on a stage that's magic. And it can happen, on street. Lee Ross always talks about that moment, you go from being a crowd to being an audience is magic. But for me, the transition that I found really sweet, let's say, was I walk onto this stage. I have vaguely my first line in mind, but I had my nervousness, and I had my sense that the only thing I'd asked for, because I make this balloon guitar, and to play it at the time, I would like to be on a stool, holding it between my legs with a microphone on it. That would be my position. And I arrived on this stage. It's so stupid. But I arrived on the stage and the stool wasn't there. And sort of like I went on, I think somehow communicating to the audience that I might be a little bit nervous as to whether or not my offering was sufficient. I went on not with this strike, which just somehow I think allowed a little bit of a reset in their minds. Jim had given me a warm introduction as well. So I go out and I have this moment on stage where I'm looking around for the stool, and I think I did a little lost puppy thing. Like there's somehow that warm, and I'm like, obviously I'm uncomfortable because something's not right. And then it just came out of my mouth. I was like, what's the exact wording on this? Something like, I'm sorry, just a slight moment here. I requested that there be a stool out here ready for me, and I need it before I can go on. And then scatological fucking humor. Like it just off in your brain, like all of a sudden, like my brain reacts in the nervousness, sort of, I was expecting a stool out here. I could produce one, but that would be pretty gross. Saying it again, it's completely not funny. But for me at the moment, it was sort of funny. And then just something clicked in my brain and I went, but I think you've seen enough shit on this stage already tonight. And I lit the place up. It was like someone, pointed out that, this was crappy.
Well, and by the sounds of it.
Like all of a sudden I was cool. And then it went from there. I had a remarkable set. Everyone was like, you were the girl. Oh, da, 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 da. And after that, yeah.
It sounds like you went out there with vulnerability. And you were vulnerable, people.
Totally.
And then you spoke the elephant in the room. This hasn't been so good, has it, everyone?
There was something about it's the confidence is such a, how do you say, you can't be great unless you're confident, but somehow if you're vain or you're arrogant or if you're aggressive, exclusive, those things turn people off. Confidence becomes like vinegar at that point, not wine. And it's like,
yeah. And so you say that this was an epiphany almost by the sound of it.
Yeah, honestly, I hadn't really. I'll put this together now. Jim on both sides of this experience for me. So, I ended up that would have been 96, something like this. And within a few years, I was doing. I don't know if you know, in Canada, you got this Just for Laughs comedy festival, which is a big deal. I ended up getting managed by the CEO of that. I did galas.
How did this happen then? Because you don't do one midnight cabaret and then you get managed by the CEO of Just for Laughs.
I'll do like the shift. The in between. The missing link on this would be Windsor for the street performing people. This keep it relevant, and then we'll go back to that. Get to that. Yeah. But the Windsor went to Waterloo, Ontario, Waterloo Buskers Festival. And Jim, at that point, gave me some lectures in fundamental street performing dynamics. This idea of get up higher, the idea of have your internal circle circumference larger, have the first 2 rows sitting down. I'm sure you guys have talked about all this stuff. Someone's talked about it before.
More than happy for you to talk about it, though. Please do.
For me, it was like not that I'm geometrically challenged, but just recognizing that, thinking that it's better if you get people closer, and then having someone go, no, here's the math. If your inner diameter is 10 meters, your circumference is 33 meters, and that can make 66 people sitting down, and then you can have 80 people sitting down, and then 150 people standing up, and then these sorts of ideas, rather than if you have an inner diameter of 5 meters, obviously you realize, no, wait, this is a much smaller number of people.
And what's quite interesting about that is, even as an obviously incredibly bright, intelligent, astute gentleman, it took you somebody sitting with you to go, look at this.
I really did. I'm again, there's being wrapped up in your own head. There's some of the nervousness or some of the craft. what do you say, the craft. There are street performers who understand human behavior in a very powerful way. Um, and I've met some really interesting human beings, street hypnotists, hypnotizing somebody in the street. Who the heck does that? Hypnotists would say you need the dark room and only the sound of your voice. Like, how did this guy do this? And it was brilliant shows. People like Lee Ross you've met, and Paul Baracco, and I mean, whatever. I don't want to name too many people because
well, you can if you like. But these people who are incredible, they have understanding. They have a particular understanding.
Yeah. And I'd say I got sort of from Jim and Waterloo, because Waterloo, I don't know if you know this or people, but Waterloo is like Canada's PhD for tech people, having an engineering degree from the University of Waterloo. It's not quite MIT level, but they're talking to each other. It's Canada's MIT type of thing. So strange.
And I assume there's some kind of Silicon Valley-esque kind of organism that exists around that.
I just noticed, strangely enough, that after my shows, I was getting much bigger tips, much more love in Guelph. I live in Guelph and it's close to Waterloo. I was getting much more attention from people. And Jim actually was the one who pointed out to me, he was like, that's because you've got an audience of people, a lot of mathematicians, a lot of scientists are really interested in what you do because they get it. They want to see this physical thing that you're firing a ball at 100 miles an hour and figure out how you're doing it. So in between, kind of like, let's put it this way. I think my biggest hat before Waterloo would have been $100 and something bucks. And Waterloo, I did a $500 hat. It was like that sort of a difference. That gave me I got confidence.
That's so interesting.
And it was literally like, and it didn't go right away. I mean, at my first show, Waterloo did this, and then Jim gave me the talk, and then the next one, and then by the last time, I really had this feel and this confidence. And you do. Charisma is such a hard thing to define. What makes you compelling in this moment? For me, actually, it's enjoying myself. If I'm really having fun and not feeling like I'm trying to impress people, again, there's that line. Are you being impressive or are you being interesting? If you're being impressive because you're being interesting, you've actually got something to show. It's different from being impressive, but somehow that
a hollow spectacle.
There's something about that. Like, again, there are musicians or jugglers. I mean, another example, you can point to someone who's technically a great juggler who just can't hold a crowd. What's going on? This musician, technically, I have to say, wow. But emotionally, I'm somehow, and again, I'm someone who, that might be one of my Achilles heels, that connection with the audience. But if I've got people who are a little more like me, maybe more mathematical geometry, a little bit on some kind of a spectrum, obsessive and impressed by real novelty. There's something different about certain minds. Certain people are impressed by the label, because they know what it is. Other people are genuinely impressed by seeing something that nobody else thought of that you thought of. Some people actually find you arrogant if you somehow think you've thought of something that nobody thought of before.
Everything's been done before. What are you talking about? Why do you think you're special?
Yeah. Why do you think you're so special? You smart ass or you whatever. And but so if you want to ask me any questions, that's
So I'm gonna help you out. So you're developing your work. The questions will come through. Very difficult to have interactive chat with the chat because it comes in about 30 seconds after you ask. So at the end of our sentence here, you might get a question. Okay. But what I'm going to do, at least for now, is I'm going to try and guide us back to. You've done the festivals, you've gone down, you've gone to the festival where there's and more. Let's call it what it is. It's a more educated crowd, and so the more intellectual elements of your show. And I've sat and watched your work, and I don't know if you're doing the same work then as you did now, but when you're talking about the life cycle with balloons biologically, when you're doing this stuff that has information, a lot of, not necessarily immensely complex, but there's information there which isn't you know, oh my God, he's wearing short shorts.
Yeah.
You're talking about biology. You're talking about geometry. You're talking about all this stuff that you need at least a tiny bit of contextual knowledge to be able to really engage with. And so, if you're going for the least educated crowd possible, maybe it sounds like it was more alienating for them than it would be to your university crowd. Do you know what I mean?
Fraser Hooper. Fraser?
Yeah, the guy he does a boxing routine. Yes.
Yeah. I mean, I have two people. One was a theater director, and Fraser and I did a little bit of a workshop. And again, it's funny because it's one thing that the theater-minded personality, it's like one of the first insights. A performer is concerned with the reaction of the audience. And Fraser's assessment of me was, you just go out there and, you entertain yourself. Maybe you might entertain somebody else. But again, there's people who are much more into the action, reaction, feedback loop. And I think what you're getting at earlier, I'm almost understanding it a little bit better right now. Faster people I'm actually going to be engaging with them. Whereas if I'm rushing ahead, or if I'm doing it in such a way that I'm not speaking people's familiar language at a cadence and tempo that they're going to be able to process, then I'm essentially disconnecting from them, and a whole other alchemy or chemistry takes over in terms of crowd dynamics.
Yeah. But there is something interesting in this, is that if an artist continuously just attempts to elicit a desired response from an audience,
yeah.
where does the artist come into it? Where's the creation? If we're all just looking to affect the audience in the same way, we will all end up being the same, because people have fairly similar mechanisms. It's the individual, it's the artist, and their voice that gives the complexity and variation.
Even in like modern music right now, there's computer programs that are being used to like predict and design what can be number one hits, and they're all based on algorithms on previous things. So it becomes a question of fulfilling expectations the best. And Shaw had this lovely quote. It's a two-parter: rational people and irrational people. Do you know this one?
No, I don't know.
Two kinds of people in the world. You've got your rational people and your irrational people. I'm paraphrasing. But rational people look at the world, see what's happening, and adapt themselves. Whereas irrational people look at the world and try to adapt the world. So there's a sense of like, it's smarter. The world is this monolith. It's this huge thing. The reasonable thing to do is to adapt yourself to suit it. And the absolutely, silly idea is that you can change that to suit you, but then the other shoe drops, and it is therefore all change is caused by
being irrational.
By irrational people. And there's something in a certain sense about that, but you know what I mean? This thesis, antithesis, synthesis. The synthesis is when you find a way to actually embody it. Fraser's suggestion to me was, go on your journey, just find a way to take people with you. And I thought, okay, that's reasonable. It's not all about the audience. Okay,
And was this at the early time?
No, this was recently. I figured stuff out quite. I had one theatrical epiphany that did take wind out of my sails and actually ended up in us meeting.
Before we get to that, let's try and work through chronology, and let's shoot all the way back to you've done your first few festivals, you travel around, you've done your $500 hat. It's Canadian dollar, $500 Canadian dollar hat.
All right.
Yeah, and so you're riding pretty high at this moment. Yeah. And then there's a gap now between this and being managed by the CEO of Just for Laughs.
Yeah, so Toronto, like I said, had its WASP conservative nature. At a certain point in living out of Toronto, I felt there were some limitations. and Montreal, Cirque du Soleil at the time, and there were a lot of modern, La La Human Steps were a great innovative dance troupe. Montreal was the cultured city, also a lot cheaper to live in Montreal in the 90s. And also a much easier place to street perform anytime you wanted. We had pedestrian places that were set up for this. There was a busker license you could get in Montreal. If there's any French speakers in the audience from France, but in Montreal you have Québécois French, which is almost like some of the words are 17th century. So you get a little busker permit and it would say "bataleur sur la domaine public," which is like the 17th century word, a bataleur, something like
What
that.
is a bataleur?
So it's basically like a troubadour, it's this old term for a traveling itinerant performer who would set up and had the right to go into a public space and make his shows and pass his hat. So Montreal was easy to go right away and click. Also, there was a large Jewish community who were doing bar mitzvahs of a certain status that I right away got absorbed into doing work for them, so there I was.
And so when you did the balloon shows for the bar mitzvahs, did you do the snipping of the balloon, and was this kind of stuff?
So depending on crowds, I mean, I've worked, one of the things, and a bit of my cultural anthropology background helped. When I go and perform for a group that has a discernible ethnicity and ethos, ethos more important than ethnicity, but in the sense that there are going to be cultural norms at this event that I better respect. These are things that, for me,
don't walk in there with your shoes off, eating bacon. While,
classic stuff like that. And then there's other stuff that you can figure out that become subcultural cues. So if you can mention, I'm forgetting right now, but there's a fellow with a hat in the Purim story. It's a 3-cornered hat. So if you make that type of thing, these are things that little
like cultural touchstones
that you can just add into your show that work really well. So I got kind of, I wouldn't say adopted, but it became not difficult for me to earn my living in Montreal and those were sort of the two domains that I was comfortably getting cash flow from. And then basically I decided one day I made this great thingamabob balloon sculpture that sort of street performing became a really interesting thing. This is cool. So I build big balloon sculptures, as well. And
there was something about you changing the way big balloon sculptures are built. So, I remember hearing something about this.
So basically in the balloon world, when I started, there were people who did large balloon sculptures. These would be wire sculptures with some sort of netting.
So like a mesh. It's like a mesh you put stuff on.
Yeah, they would call it topiary design. And then they would tie round balloons to them. Sort of right from the beginning, I remember doing a balloon convention. That happened as well. I had my other subplot in my life. A balloon convention in Chicago in 1996 or something. And the centerpiece, it was at O'Hare Airport Hotel. One of them, I think at Hilton or something. And they had these flying biplanes that they suspended up in the atrium. And gosh darn it, those things, if they fell, would have killed somebody. They were like 1/4-inch aluminum pipe, and they were so heavy. They just ended up, aluminum is light, but they built these redundantly complicated substructures. And I just remember looking at it and thinking, balloons, you're using 150 pounds of metal to hold up 20 pounds of balloons. What the heck? So I started sculptures that were geometry building. There's another fellow named Marvin Hardy who had his own way of building with animal balloons. It was a little large as well. But basically that became one of my things. And when I was street performing, if there were quiet moments, I would build build. You know how like it sort of became a 3-part performance. It would be something like chalk artist, you know. Then there would be something like, it was very slow, something like, oh, would you like a balloon? Here's a balloon. Thank you very much. And then there'd be something like, oh, look, there's a bunch of people watching me. Now I'll do a show. And I would go out, and instead of doing like three shows over the course of a day, oftentimes I would do like 8-10 hour days. And so, I mean, literally at some point I would get a big show or two. At some point I would get, you know, like nice tips from someone. At some point I'd get, you know, just whatever, this tip for the big word. And that was in Montreal, working consistently, you know, with a license. And some, you know, people, oh, just for laughs. One day I called up and I set up an appointment with a junior person. I think she was an intern. Showed up at the office with a giant balloon sculpture, got invited into the CEO's office. You know, made myself noticed, talked to him for a little bit, hit it off, really cool guy. He invited me to do his kid's bar mitzvah. You know, I guess he'd seen me around, you know, before another one. And
I seen you in my friend's snip. I bring you to mine.
Well, that's the bris, is the snip.
The bris.
Bar mitzvah's, you know, 13-year-old kid becoming, you know, an adult, right?
So it's not the snip. How ignorant of me.
That's the bris.
Yes.
So yeah, I mean, sort of to say, like CEO, Just for Laughs kids bar mitzvah, and Celine Dion's manager was there. She's got several managers, but her personnel manager, her social event manager, not her husband manager. So I did Celine Dion's family Christmas party, like, you know, a month and a half later. And it was let's say a really successful run of stuff. At that point, I got booked to do my first Just for Laughs gala. That also went well. But
can you just before we go, the Just for Laughs gala? I mean, I want to. We've been on for quite a while now, and I want to ask you more information about everything, but I'm holding back because I know you've got so much story to tell. But your first Just for Laughs gala, just lead us through your experience a little bit.
Yeah. So again, there's 2 levels in the Just for Laughs. There's the live, the big people, you know, and at that you'll always have someone who's, you know, fairly established, and a bunch of medium established people, and a few people who are new, and then you'll have someone who's quite new. So my first Just for Laughs gala was the warm-up act. So your expectations are nice and low. The TV lights aren't there. This is interesting. So I did 2 Just for Laughs galas. And my first one went amazing. My second one's a whole other story.
Yeah, let's focus on the first one just for now.
So this one, low expectations, not intense TV lights, young, idealistic. I was still in this relationship with someone at the time, and I wasn't in a management deal. I was just like, oh, you look cool. Let's see how this works. So I went out. I built there's a bonhomme vert, the mascot for Just for Laughs, this green guy. I built a giant version of him, and he was backstage. I went up and I did some material that really got warm laughs. I did, you know, just the right amount of time. And then
what sort of stuff did you do? Did you do the more adult style stuff?
Yeah, I did more of the sound effects stuff. I mean, I have a routine where I make a balloon lion, but I don't make a lion that looks like a lion. It sounds like a lion. It's basically like a vocal box and a vocal cord, and I activate the cord and it roars. And with a microphone, it's a very powerful, you can close your eyes and hear a lion type of thing. And then it changes into a whale, you know, with some whale singing, and with a bit of echo on it. It's quite, again, convincing. And then it changes into a bumblebee. And it's all done a little bit deadpan, and it's surprising. And my shtick at that point in time, my opening bit was, you know, I'm Sean Rooney. I do balloon animals. You know, you think of balloon animals, you think of a dog. This is a dog. I don't make them. You know, I have an extra strong I don't make dog policy. It extends to animals that pretend to be something other than dogs, like this so-called giraffe, which is only a dog with a long neck, and I don't make dogs. Boom. And then I go into, these balloon animal sounds, which are just so abstract. And then the finale for that was so strong.
It almost feels a bit like magic when you do that. I've seen you do it. It feels like magic because you don't expect those noises to come out of those objects.
That's it. And again, it's one of those things that the street, those ones don't work anywhere near as strong as they do in an environment where I'm the only thing coming through like massive speakers. It's like really like, whoa, it's very, very strong material. Oh, strong material.
Yeah, strong material.
But
and so you go to the gala and this kicks then. This hits really hard.
And the finale again was this idea of I still do make balloon animals, and then I brought out the giant Just for Laughs mascot, and it was like fairy tale feeling. Like I went backstage afterwards, and the CEO of Just for Laughs was like, "That's wonderful," and if I wasn't CEO of Just for Laughs, I'd manage you, and I put that in my mental, filing cabinet, and away I went. So that ended up, that was that early kind of peak, and then I just did a lot of international festivals. I was working a lot in Dubai. Had a few other sort of late 90s.
Were you getting a lot of love? Did the thing of being this guy who should be at a little car at the corner gone? That's not there anymore?
Yeah, so basically, I went down to a balloon convention in Vegas in the year 2000, and I got the title of Balloon Entertainer of the Year and blah blah blah. So at that point, I had
and just before, and I hate to keep doing this, but just before, what is a balloon convention like?
Oh, they're pretty hilarious. You have like a real range of people. I've been to ones in the States and I've been to ones in Europe. They're quite different. There's some politics. There's some politics. Europeans are a little. Americans, especially my early ones, there were a lot of people who were big fish in little ponds. The Chicago one I mentioned earlier, I met 4 people who were like, "Hi, I'm so and so, the greatest balloon twister in the world." And it's like, you're here at a balloon convention. That's your opening salvo. I'm the greatest balloon twister in the world. Sit down. I met a guy who was like Balloon Picasso, and you're like, okay, well, let's see what you got. And you're like, that's a dog with a long neck. Okay.
I've seen the giraffe before.
They're not my people. I met a few people in the convention in the States that I warmed to. Whereas I got to Europe, balloon convention in Belgium, got off an airplane, met a guy named Badou who already knew who I was, and he was like, salut Sean, tu veux fumer un peu de hashish? Attends, viens. I was like, je suis arrivé. So Europe was just lovely for me, that initial kind of connection, and because the Irish connection. I've got a UK passport at the moment. My dad's Northern Irish, but I'm gonna apply for a real Irish one.
Yeah, apply for the European one, because as poor UK people, our passports won't be worth much soon.
Yeah,
we digress.
It's sad. Yeah.
2000. Okay, so you've gone to a balloon convention.
So basically, that's how the story goes. So I 96 in Montreal, 97 do my first gala. Get this promise, go have like a few years of being just successful balloon guy and doing Europe, and I was doing master classes for balloon artists and stuff like that. And comfortable. And then Andy Nolman, the CEO of Just for Laughs, I saw in the newspaper that he was leaving Just for Laughs and starting a company called Airborne Entertainment. He ended up killing it as a content provider for cell phones. But I just read this Airborne Entertainment. Andy Nolman's on his own, he said he'd be my manager if he wasn't this. I sent him a note, and he went, sure, come to Montreal, talk to his partner, his investor. We signed a management deal. I got like a stipend, advances, guaranteed.
And what was the management deal like, terms to sign?
So I can drop some, whatever. There was 25 grand I was promised for the first year doing nothing. Basically advance money that would just be paid to me. Plus, I could.
And what was in the route to then? Because if they're offering you 25 grand, they expect something back from you. There's no free dinners.
Yeah. I mean, sort of at this point, there were a couple of different options. Obviously, Blue Man Group was kicking at that point, and sort of my stuff really lined up with some of that.
And, visual, kind of a little bit abstract-esque.
Yeah. We had sort of a little bit of a faith that I was some kind of creative guy who was going to come up with something, just needed to know the right people, right environment, and sort of it just ended up, it was fairy tale a little bit, like the beginning part. And were you
fairly full of yourself at this point? And I don't mean that. I mean, we talk a lot. We're friends. I know how the story goes. Yeah. But within this interview, did this have an effect on you?
You feel like you've arrived. Like there's one particular moment where, okay, so again, my weakness as a performer, businessman would be in things like packaging. What's my costume? Have I hired comedy writers? How's my lighting? What's my, all that other stuff, especially because my act has some stage challenges that, anyway. So basically, I had a notion that I was in good hands, and it really amplified quickly. About a month and a half into the management deal, Cirque du Soleil announced they were going to put on this television variety show. They were looking specifically for novelty variety acts who did something that everybody knew already, but they did it in an innovative way. And so I was like, here we go. I'm like,
that's me. Thank you.
And my manager is like, hi, it's Andy Noman. You're, set it up. So immediately I got snapped up by that process. And initially it was like I was going to do one episode out of 13. And then it just so happened that it got like, they'd phone me up and ask, could I do anything for this? And then it just looked like I was going to have a recurring role in this TV series that never ended up happening. It dragged out like 6 months, and then the whole thing got canceled. But it was 6 months of a management deal where now he had abdicated any development. Cirque du Soleil was going to take care of costuming. Cirque du Soleil was going to take care of, all of this style aspect. And
so he's basically gone like, I don't need to worry about this anymore. And this was originally something you understood would be handled, right?
It looked like, Cirque was working on the time too. And there was like, hey, maybe we can do a show that's like Hair. This can be like, a real full-on spectacle. And again, with their massive organization, you could be talking to people who are blowing smoke up your ass. Does Guy Laliberté finally say yes or no? That's a whole other set of things. You don't even know if he's heard. You're talking to someone who's like, looking at you as a prospect, right? But long story short, that thing totally kiboshes. I got 6 months where I've been paid money in Montreal. I'm partying. One of my friends who's a street performer and I kind of got into a little bit of a bad party habit regime. And back to your question, yeah, I was a little bit full of myself, not in the sense of arrogant, just in the sense of like hopeful. Like I knew just how many things I could do, and in my mind I could visualize stage turns that had all these complicated sculptures and all this complicated sound, and were presented in a way that was palatable and consumable, and so I built that imagination muscle up so much. So flash forward 6 months, this whole thing gets canceled. Now I'm like 7.5, 8 months into this deal. The guy's giving me all this money. There's nothing to show for it. He's still producing the Just for Laughs galas. He schedules me into another Just for Laughs gala. It's a Just for Laughs gala that's a non-speaking role for me, because they make more money selling to TV worldwide when it's non-verbal. And they always have roles for people there. And I have a couple of months to put together a non-verbal stage turn when I'd never effectively shut my mouth for more than 5 minutes at a time.
But did you feel confident at this point? You've come off the back of success.
I basically, I was delusional for a certain period of time. I think I think the first tinge that maybe the gala would not go well was literally when I was behind the riser on the stage and it was about to start.
So you'd had so much self-confidence before this that it never even come into your mind.
I had like a month and a half where I knew I was going to be, on Jon Stewart's night. And some people might know it, but I knew it was
I think people have heard of the name Jon Stewart.
It was the biggest night that you could have been on that year. Like it was the
well, just for the sake of historical reference for the archive, why would Jon Stewart being there be the biggest night?
So one of the things about Just for Laughs is that it's away from Hollywood, but it's where basically all Hollywood goes and a lot of deals get signed there. So Jon Stewart at that point in time was an important emerging comic, but a lot of the Daily Show, or whatever his show ended up being, a lot of the big contracts were signed there. And he was also, let's say, the biggest name, already emerging, but it was like, this is the next, he's going nuclear at that point. So my manager, having been the ex-CEO and the producer of these events, picked the plum spot for me, let's just say. During the preparation phase, I'm like, yeah, I can do this, and I can do this, and I can do this. And I decided I was going to record my own soundtrack, and I literally did rehearsals in a living room without lighting, and yeah, I can do this. Yeah, that's timed right. That's timed right. And yeah, I've never done this act in front of a stage, an audience before. I imported a lot of things from the modality of the verbal. So there's a lot of stuff that is very funny, but I just got to say this little thing here. And now I'm going to try to mime it. And I'm not, ask Sofer, I'm no mime, right? I have expressiveness, but I really would have needed a physical movement coach or director to go this. Okay, now practice that in front of a mirror 30 times until you can do it.
Yes. Until it looks beautiful.
Yeah. So I literally, I went on to this important environment with an utterly untested product. Like I said, I had a little bit of anxiety before I went onto the stage. And Mac King, some magician people might know him, he was in my change room. He suggested antiperspirant on the hands because I can kind of get sweaty hands. And I put roll-on deodorant on my hands.
Which turns white.
And foamy and lubricated. So I literally was unable to tie balloons when I went on a stage. They were slipping out of my hands. I couldn't blow them up properly.
And has it dawned on you before you've walked out there that this might not go the way you expect?
Literally, just before the riser goes up, I'm looking at my hands backstage, realizing that I changed pants because I actually wiped my
trousers for the English members
off on them. Trousers, yeah. I wiped off. So basically, I put all this roll-on deodorant. I had like white foam on my hands. I wiped it off on my black pants. It looked like I'd come all over myself. It was visible. It was disgusting. For some reason, I'd gotten 2-for-1 pants when I did it. And I know why. I was like, I'll be a professional. If something goes wrong. And so literally like a minute before I was due, I'm backstage changing my pants and I got these on and the hands just keep reproducing the foam. It's like a degree. I can even see the fucking the little canister. It's 24-hour protection and it's got this bizarre thing where it clings to your skin. You can't wipe it off. Like I really would have needed like a full-on lather a couple of times to get rid of the slip. And it just kept making stuff. Anyway, I changed my pants, but I had all the balloons for the show in the other pants, and I didn't change the balloons because I got my call. And when I noticed it, I had some balloons that were in my change room in the garbage, and I grabbed a handful of those, not knowing which ones were the right ones or which ones I'd thrown in because they had holes in them,
deficient
scraps.
Yeah.
So I stuffed them in my pocket, which didn't work because I had an uncomfortable lumpiness in my pants now, and there's still white rubbing off of them, but not as much as the first shot. Anyway, so there I am now backstage looking at these sweaty hands, realizing, shit, it's about to happen, and there's just that initial I blow up a balloon very quickly, and it requires to have a good grip on the lip.
It's like a pinch kind of thing.
And I have that not at all. So my entrance was to be taking the proscenium with full confidence and blowing up a balloon in a millisecond. Here I am.
Yeah.
Instead, as I walked to the front and tried to get my grip, I didn't get it wide enough. And so I ended up in a situation where it's like, do I try? And I guess I have to try. Here's the drum roll going, and I go, and instead of blowing it up, I just literally, I was sweating already by that point. The TV lights, the nervousness is like, oh, I was sweating and spitting, and I literally, I mean, I might misremember, but at least 5 people physically reacted as though some of my effluent ended up on their person. So
it wouldn't have been a show to do in COVID.
No, you know what? Yeah, that's certainly. It was certainly. I was not socially distancing, and then I went downhill. I lost my cues.
So from that moment, was there a feeling of, because I've had this when I perform, that the ground starts swallowing you, and you keep moving, you keep talking, but the ground is not safe underneath you.
There's something of shock. You're going on, carrying on the movements. Now, again, this is, and music is a great analogy. Like, if you've practiced that piece 1,000 times, you can be in shock and still play it because your muscle motor memory takes over. But this was an act I'd never done before. I'm literally not queued up with the soundtrack that's playing, you know. So all of my process is gone. Things go from bad to worse to bad to worse to bad to worse. Like, stuff happened in that show that was just not just embarrassing. And then finally, for my exit, I was supposed to go off on a life-size Harley Davidson motorcycle on a platform, and I was precariously balanced, sort of one leg down, but the other leg looking like I was riding. And the stagehand, my manager audibly screamed me off the stage at the same moment that the band dropped, because the band was like, I did 12 minutes. And, you know, I can go on a little bit.
And were you supposed to do 10 then?
5.
Wow.
5 to 7, and I did 12.
Wow. Oh God. And it wasn't just 12 minutes of gold. It was 12 minutes of...
I got called excruciatingly embarrassing in the newspaper.
By who?
Next day. The Montreal Gazette, front page of the entertainment section, does a review of the gallery.
Okay, so let's not go to that yet. Let's deal with... So you've come through the show. It's been hell, and every other performer here will understand what Sean is describing. Yeah. You reach the end, you get verbally screamed off by your manager.
So the guy yanks me, and instead of, like, we did it once in rehearsal where he did hand over hand, because it was precariously this way, he yanks me. I literally go back. I caught my arm. I sprained my shoulder. I still have some ongoing rotator cuff stuff from that. Screamed like a little baby, crawled off the stage. Initially, before sort of you do this thing, you get the talking to, which is, you'll do your bit, you go back to the change room, people are going to come and visit you, you know. I didn't even go to my change room. I just crawled out. I went out the backstage door.
Oh, how did you feel? Specifically this night, that night, you've got home, or you're going home.
Yeah, like, so
you're deciding what to do.
So you get some drugs. Yeah, and then you spend a certain amount of time convincing yourself that it wasn't really as bad, because you're with a maniac who's out of his mind going, you were great. You know, in a retro way, I can reclaim it because it was sort of punk. You know what I mean? If I say I was a punk, I spat on Hollywood, man. I showed them what I really thought.
Exactly that. Yeah, they thought they were going to see something beautiful. You gave something raw. You gave something real.
But literally, so, you know, no sleep that night. I was in this really cool apartment in Montreal. I go down at 5:45 or whatever, 6 o'clock in the morning, and to the dépanneur where they sell, you know, beer. And fucking, there's the Montreal Gazette there, buy a copy of the Montreal Gazette. Still could have been okay. Open it up.
Let's see what the reviews are like.
Yeah. I got mentioned 4 times. There were 3 reviewers. One guy gave me technical achievement. One person gave me worst act, and never won. Worst act, Sean Rooney. It was excruciatingly embarrassing, and never want to see again, Sean Rooney. And then,
well, at least you were ranked.
I got right. And then the third guy, he put me down again for never want to see again. But he put down never want to see anyone have as much bad luck as the balloon guy.
Oh, well, at least he understood and he was sympathetic.
Yeah, but literally.
So what do you do after that? Like, so what? Your drug-addled mind.
Went into my manager's office that afternoon.
The same day, you've not slept.
Basically, yeah. Basically, it was like we agreed that the management deal was over, and I just sort of like went off. And at that point, I got back a little bit. What was I going to do? Street performing was where you go.
Did he ask you for anything at the end of the management deal? Was there any attempt for them to recompensate themselves?
No, of course not. There was. It was a management deal. This was money that was invested in me, and whatever. I mean,
did they see it at the time as like it was their bad? And it sounds horrible for me to say this, but it was their bad investment. They felt at the time.
Let's put it this way: looking back in time, I mean, I know for sure that if I had a more the Cirque du Tour was problematic. It really would have been helpful if I'd have been able to say, here's where I would love to take your power and influence in terms of this is how I visualize myself as an artist. This is what I really see, who and how I am, and let's finance this rather than having someone else try to package and present me. But yeah, it was, I'd say amicable. I've even talked to Andy since then. I mean, there's no bad blood. Showbiz is showbiz, and Jon Stewart was apparently quite pissed off at me. Yeah, that's all I know. Apparently, there was one person who actually said things that were, but quite frankly, from his point of view, he's a very professional guy, and who was this idiot who literally fucked up the critics all agreed that the first half of the show, technical difficulties hurt the momentum of the whole thing. So yeah, I'm not going to pretend that I was. I can understand how things happen, but I can also see how it was a faux pas.
Yeah, exactly that. So, how does one pick themselves back up after this then?
So, I mean, the funniest story is that my actual return to the stage happened about 1.5 years later, when an old friend of mine who's a theater director saw me at a party once and asked what I was recounting to 2 females who seemed particularly interested in me. And his point was they seemed to be empathizing. He'd seen me impressing people that he found that empathizing. Actually, it was me telling them the story of what it was like to bomb it just for laughs. And so he'd always talked about doing a theater thing with me, and we decided we'd do a one-man show called Like a Lead Balloon, the true story of a blown opportunity, which would recount in real time what it's like to have that experience I just told you about, it just for laughs.
Yeah.
So we actually did, that was a full 6-month development process, writing, rehearsing.
And what does that process go into? Just is that you guys sitting together with a pen and paper, or a lot of cocaine and beer, and just going, yeah, we'll do this. No, it
was fairly formal process. I mean, he comes from a theater background, and writing a sketch, setting up props, figuring out how the thing could be told, and it's a very the opening scene in Like a Lead Balloon is me speaking to the audience, and behind me is the riser. The riser's about to go up, and Jon Stewart is introducing me, and this could be my big break, and how did I get here, and what's going to happen is all sort of built into that moment.
Very personal, isn't it? It's very personal. That
actually, we ended up the whole thing ended up being a strangely not sad, but something poignant about the whole thing. I mean, tragic actually in some ways.
Was the catharsis?
There was something there. We ended up Puppetry of the Penis actually did a tour in my hometown like 2 weeks before I did, and they grossed $300,000 box office, and we ended up losing about $1,800 on our marketing engagement. So it was.
Why do you think that was? I mean, Puppetry of Penis is a big show. It's got a nice name to it. There's an easy sell. It's an easy sell.
I came back to my hometown with what I thought would be, fairly. I thought I would be big fish in a small town again. There was some problems getting media coverage initially. But the reason I'm going into all of this is the poignancy of it. There's a fellow who had started independent press and independent critics and an independent theater award for London, Ontario. And my biggest audience, I think, was 35 one night, and he was one of them. And he ended up awarding it Comedy of the Year. Wrote a really beautiful review about it. It ended up being like the other shoe dropping on the catharsis. He called it the most self-deprecating show. It was excruciatingly, that he went over his humiliation with excruciating detail. Was the way that he turned around the excruciatingly embarrassing from the thing. So, plus it was done.
And did you? Was his description accurate?
You know what? My parents were in the audience that night, and they loved it. And they would be about as hard to impress their theater people. They saw it as it still to this day might have been my best turn on a stage that night that they were there. It was a very there's something compelling about it, and as a vehicle, it allows me to talk about some of the technical stuff about balloons, in a way that's letting someone in on what goes wrong. And
I suppose also as well, because it's wrapped around a personal drama and struggle. People, if they can't empathize with the technical details of balloons, they can empathize with the personal drama and struggle.
The fear of public speaking is the greatest fear among humans. Regularly outholds death, and it's one of those things where that fear. My experience is just about the nightmare come true. So there is something much more universal and relatable about that setup that I think allows a lot of the eccentricities and particularities of my personality to fall under a more human umbrella, let's say.
Is it akin to the dream where you realize it's the dream where you realize you're walking down the street and you're naked? And that's the comparable experience to realizing you've fucked up on a stage in front of lots of people.
There's something, again, that humiliation is a particularly, what's the opposite of an endorphin? It's like there's something where you do hallucinate.
Depressants? Maybe not. No, not quite.
Something hallucinatory about it. There really is that sense of embarrassment. Yeah, there's. And then again, just because the balloon is a little bit of a metaphor for that, in the sense of full of yourself and blown up and then deflated. Those really apply. So there certainly is that sense of deflation. That maybe when you were blown up and full of that inspired ideal, everything is possible kind of thing, that you were actually delusional.
Well, to extend the metaphor, after you did the stage piece and after you got this this beautifully backhanded critique of it, which was it. What position were you in personally? Where was your head at of this tour?
Yeah, I'd still say. So I actually ended up contacting the guy.
Which guy?
The guy who wrote the review.
Okay, yeah.
Gave me the Critics Award.
And
crazy because it turned out there were some deep connections he and I had around. He was a documentary filmmaker who, was obsessed with a story that happened like 300 meters from where I grew up as a kid. It's a historical event that happened in Canada that he was a specialist in. But yeah, there's a little bit of hope again, but again, there was that feeling of the down after that, and then it was the up again, and then.
Well, where does the up come back into it then? Because you've done the theatre piece, so you feel. Kind of. I'm just going to try and cut. So you feel down because obviously you had this great opportunity and it's not come the way you wanted it to, and then you've done this theatre piece, which seems, by the sounds of it, without watching it, artistically, it's got integrity to it and it's honest and. It stumbles again, but it's given credibility artistically, even though it stumbles. And then you're left in this position after.
So the other shoe why I mentioned tragic is the fellow, his name was Chris Doty. He ended up committing suicide. So in some way, I won't say that it, you can't take something like that personally, but there was almost like a sense of, just a poignancy of that this is something that is too fragile for the world. So then, I mean, and then you end up in a reality right now where you got to end up surviving. You got to get back. You got to do street. You got to, ended up having another management deal. I came back to Toronto, and that ended up being even worse than the other.
Explain. So you go. I can understand personally. Maybe other people are watching can't. You go back to the street.
Yeah.
So you start performing in public squares. You're making money. You're sustaining an income to survive.
Doing what you can.
How does the other management deal creep in then?
So actually, a street performer, Eli, had a company called Zero Gravity here in Toronto. An old friend of mine, and he just started up this rather ambitious company, and just, asked to exclusively manage me for a year, and I thought it was going to work, and it just didn't end up working. There were a few different reasons. Actually, they found me arrogant. I was like, I'm sorry, you booked me for whatever. I mean, I was less than.
But when they say you found, so by the sounds of it, there's conflict. Where's the conflict come from with this? Without, I don't want to. I'm not going to tell you to bitch about people that you still have relationships with or anything.
I wasn't getting any work, and I was perceived as being arrogant. And for me, I mean, part of my image or part of my brand, if I'm hired to twist balloons for kids in lines, and there's a kid here and a kid here, and they're getting paid the same amount for hours as me, this is bad for my brand. And I mean, on one level, sure, you're getting paid $100 an hour, great, but it just became, I didn't get anything that was really progressive. And at the end of it, I was in financial difficulty again. So
was it the kind of work, or was it so basically they wanted to book you out to do something which it's going to sound mean, but you believe was beneath you because you, and I'd be honest with you, in terms of the skill you have, may have been putting you on a stall, making balloon animals for kids, isn't really using your talents to the best it is.
I struggle with that a lot. And again, it's when the person who's managing you doesn't have or doesn't care about the understanding of the difference. Anyway, it was that was that phase. I did a few street festivals again at that point. Hooked up with a few international people, and then basically it just was like at the end of that year, it was like, screw it. I moved back to Europe, or I moved to Europe full time. Worked in German Variety. So I met a few of these people here. I saw Steve putting some stuff in. And, so I ended up meeting.
Can I just ask you this? Was there a threat of identity at any point? Did you question, who am I? What am I doing?
Yeah, I mean, part of my, you and I have talked a lot about this stuff. So I mean, part of my difficulty is that my estimation of my personality, my actual self-evaluation, is not entirely divorced from my performing persona, but a lot of it is on other more esoteric or abstract considerations that don't bear or don't relate on approbation. I mean, I don't need other people to tell me I'm doing the right thing when I'm off in my own little planet.
But these failures didn't threaten that sense of identity. That's the kind of thing I'm getting at.
In a certain sense, again, I would have defensive mechanisms that allowed me to never get despondent. I never, whatever, but there would be some depressed periods where you begin to wonder if other people would appreciate it. One of the things that I always have in my pocket is the reaction I can get from a 3, 4, 5, 6, 7-year-old kid. There is just the repertoire of stuff. I have music and magic and balloons, and so those things always would replenish my depleted psyche. When I would need it. So
no idea where the quote is, but I saw a quote on Facebook today saying, "If you can stop a child and entertain them, you can stop an entire crowd."
So honest to goodness, the best. I sort of a lot of my work, and then I worked in Macau, China, all that other stuff. But one of my most amazing experiences in China happened when I was working in a high-end mall outside of a casino type of thing, and you're basically entertaining mums and kids while the fathers go and gamble away college funds. Anyway, Macau, crazy place. There was a kid during one of my shows who was 2 years old, like not 3 yet, 2 and something, and just enjoyed so much. You could hear like the kid laughs, and you're like, first of all, he understands English, and then I saw him explaining something to his grandmother, who was with him, who didn't speak English.
I'm just going to grab something. I'm listening to you. Please carry on.
So one of those crazy moments when here's this kid. He's really cool. He's really funny. He's really engaging. He speaks fluent, like 2 and something, fluent English, Cantonese, and Mandarin. Like, who the heck is this kid? And it just turned into one of those moments where, I had 30 or 40 people in this little mall show on, a small stage. It's nothing large. And I just there were no other kids in that particular group, and I just decided to give the balloon that I made to that kid. And he asked if I could make. He asked if I could make a dragonfly or something. Yeah, I can make a dragonfly. And it just turned into one of those situations. Back to your, entertain a kid and entertain an audience. For me, maybe not necessarily if I can entertain a kid, then I can entertain an audience. But if I take that kid, and this is China too as well, there's some interesting dynamics around children.
Explain, come on, you can't say that and not explain it.
So, especially in mainland, you have kids how they are up until grade 2, and then you have kids until after grade 2. There's a lot of allowance made for infants, but once you're you get a lot of pressure.
But is this the similar thing to the Middle East? Like, I know Middle Eastern kids, there's a tradition of not telling them off. Middle Eastern kids can do whatever the fuck they want to do.
Yeah, the Middle East, they don't tend to get stopped at any point soon. Or they'll get stopped by a Mack truck. In China, they're turned into school and into school discipline. Dubai, you have that really enable thing. In China, I'd say they're much more disciplined, but there's just something free and goofy about them. Like they're beautiful kids. I found them very, very open, and then I go and I'd entertain grade 2 and grade 3, and I find I'd have to almost crack a shell. There's some kind of shell that we built up around them. But anyway, this kid in particular was just such a shining, bright, amazing, funny kid. And I just sat down on the edge of this little stage that I'm working on and made a balloon for him. And then I ended up literally sitting down on the floor so that I was below his level. So he was looking down to me, and I was making balloons for him. And it was a very bizarre thing because it was one of the best audiences I've ever had, asking questions, asking to see that again. giggling at all the right moments, like, making commentary, turning around and saying stuff to his mom and his dad. It got the whole audience laughing. You know what I mean? It was like, I concentrated on this kid probably for 10, 12 minutes, and I had the biggest audience that mall ever got. Like, literally, people were like pushing around to see what was going on, like, and then moving and letting someone else come and see, because it was just this kid was so neat. And so it's this really funny thing. I went, in the Chinese market, entertaining the kid, making the kid engaged is actually what entertained the audience for me most successfully. Just sort of a bizarre.
Yeah. Well, the audience were able to engage with the joy of the child and the joy of you playing. One of the things I want to touch on, and we're 4 minutes away from 2 hours now, so we're reaching. Yeah, time flies, mate. During this time,
I'm going out for Rumpel. All right, we'll eat Bull Rumpel. Let's go. 6 hours, baby. I'm up. Let's go.
Oh, okay. I'll put the kettle on then. So you were. I met you in Edinburgh, and you're working in Edinburgh at the time. Is this much after? Do we have a?
This is like chapter 22. By the time I got to Edinburgh, where we met, what was so funny about that was Mike Bonici was my connection going in there, and I stayed at a place, and Mike and Kate Muir also warmed me up, and a few other people.
Kate Muir?
Yeah, but I really thought that Edinburgh would be like friendly, and somehow, and I thought that my credibility going into Edinburgh would be like someone returning to the streets.
Because you're an artist and you do original, interesting work.
Something like that, but it just...
Well, I'm saying that. That's my observation of your work.
Matt, thank you very much. And I definitely met some great people at Edinburgh who I'm friends, and I'm glad to know them. And the whole experience ended up being well. And the...
well, I'll say this now. Silver just said, I'm sure the people, he said, more time, please. People will listen more. So I am in no rush.
Silver's someone who, I met people... And honest to goodness, one of the things that I can now use that helps me to, let's say, move forward on all of this is to go, the people who are being jerks to me weren't the good performers anyway. The people who, like you and like Silver.
Well, let's tell the whole story here, because, you say performers are being jerks to me, and for everyone who's listening now, that's the first point of information in the fact that you might not have had a good Edinburgh. So let's go through the story. You arrive there. You expect that you're going to have some cred because you've made an effort to make something original. And surely in an arts festival, this will be appreciated.
Yeah.
Explain from that point.
Well, let's put this. I hadn't really done circle shows in a while. I brought an amplification system that was not useful and was unreliable, and maybe I'd underestimated not the gravitas, but just the traditions and the fact that people really earn a lot of their money for the year at this point. So this is serious for people.
And so the expectation of professionalism.
Maybe for me, it was not so important that I made a lot of money at that festival, or I wasn't treating it with that same level. So there might have been some signals I was unconsciously sending to other people that maybe there wasn't. There.
Well, let's be honest with this. I mean, do you mind if I put into this story?
Go ahead. Yeah.
So one of the things that happened in that festival, as happens in some festivals, there's a question of who should be working the main pitches. These people aren't good enough to work the main pitches.
Yeah.
And it's ridiculous. And I know it's ridiculous because I had that a few years before I saw you there. I had this thing of people said in the draw, if you can't do big shows, you shouldn't take the centre pitch. And somebody who said it, I won't mention their name, AM, looked at me. And when they looked at me, I thought, okay, I'm going to fucking show you. I'm going to show you what bullshit you're talking about. And I closed the street off. And every security member in the entire area had to come and try and manage the crowd to stop it.
Yeah.
Because crowd doesn't make a good show. Crowd is just understanding how to manipulate your environment. It's not artistry.
Yeah.
And that was my problem with the thing I heard the year you were there, where people are going, oh, they're not big shows. They're not. And you think, hang on a minute, you're doing hack bullshit. You're doing a show which has no original lines.
Yeah.
It's It's competent, it's well crafted. But this guy's doing something original and interesting and something I haven't seen before. And fuck me, if you're going to put someone on the center stage, why not put someone who's doing something original and interesting on there? I really, really had problems with the way you were dealt with in that festival. I'll be honest, I did.
You know, whatever. I did get a few apologies afterwards, and honest to goodness, I mean, I can hold myself. You know, I go back.
Can you? I mean, I'm sorry, I've made a mistake as an interviewer. I've gave too much information away from statement. I should ask you, can you go through the experience of it?
Well, I just found it again new. It was weird feeling like a new kid on the block, so I didn't even notice that that's what had happened. You know, and then just there was one day when I was told not to drop my name into the hat for the main pitch because there had been some complaints that I wasn't good enough to put on a big show. And all of a sudden it was like, you know, an issue among, you know, because there were people there who, you know, like yourself or like Mike Benici who found that just so whatever. And then there, to me, was like
so whatever. But you mean that there's people like me or Mike who thought that was bullshit. The fact that the people are claiming that you're not good enough to be there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then their expectation of me was that I would make a ruckus about it. But my positioning or my energy, and I was smoking a lot of weed that festival, my drive, you know, my willingness to take a negative assessment at that point was weird. You know, I did take it a little bit personally, you know. It was,
well, why wouldn't you? I can understand.
It was a little destabilizing, you know. And it was, and then figuring out, you know, you have your theories as to who did it, and then, you know, those people are, you know, protesting the loudest that it wasn't them. Of course, you find out that it was, but anyway, it was more. I found it just a little bit, and the weather that year wasn't the greatest weather, so there was like a little bit of, you know, people being protective of their hats. So anyway,
but the thing that I'd like to get at with this is the fact that you're a guy who's got interesting, creative, original work, and you got sidelined in an arts festival.
Yeah.
And one of the points of doing these interviews, part of it is that I have this conceit that we've lost a lot of originality as a craft over the years that I've worked here. And part of it is that people like yourself who've got original, creative, interesting work that might not get a crowd of 800 people, but would get a crowd of 400-500 people that would be engaged and interested and see something they've never seen before, is so easily discounted because we're all thinking like, maximize the income. That's the job we do.
Yeah. Well, there's certainly, again, there's what works, where you're almost treating human beings as a means to an end.
It's like do you call it a function mechanism? You have the input, the process, and then the output, and the audience is the process. I put this in and I get this out. Yeah.
I mean, at the point where, and I mean, with kids, it's really interesting too, because you can see that moment where you spark creativity in a kid, and the distance in time between that creativity spark and them wanting to go do something on their own and not pay attention to you anymore can be very short, and you got to respect that. So it's paradoxical that there's this, if I've got to entertain kids for 45 minutes, you want to almost hypnotize them. If you really want to inspire them, they're going to have ants in their pants. Like, you know, forget about having this. So there's something about turning, and for me, there's a difference. It's that crowd audience versus what would be one beyond audience. Would be something like a class, you know. And again, there's something interesting here where are you two ways of being entertaining? One's a show and one is teaching. You know, and some people in shows say education and entertainment should be kept separate. Don't try to bring any. Whereas I'm someone who's like, again, there's something that I can do that's a routine that I know will get a response. If I start to engage in a dialectic or a discourse where I'm going to keep your attention by having you think, or and put you in a modality where you don't know what comes next, where you're genuinely, there's been enough stuff that's happened that your assessment of your ability to assess the next step has come into question, and you're open to something new.
Can I give just because it popped in my head and I think it sounds nice. You discombobulate the sense of protocol.
There's something there, yeah. When you rip the earphones out of your ear,
there's something there, isn't there?
And your ears are now open to what people are actually saying. I don't know. It's
you're working well on the fly, mate. You're working well on the fly.
I mean, there's something about, again, pattern recognition and fulfillment, and like you say, discombobulation, and some form of, not necessarily titillation, but some form of awareness of possibilities. That's not a pattern, but that's not an expectation, but that's a hope, almost something more in that side of like a feasible, pleasurable response that you don't know what it is yet. A surprise. Yeah, that's probably the best way to put it. So being able to deliver surprises, maybe that's a nice way to format this in a way that actually might conform people's expectations.
It's definitely there, but the part that you say about education I find interesting, okay? And when I watched your show, as a person who's attempted in my later life to be learned, I've attempted to learn as much information as possible. To watch someone who puts realistic, informative detail into their work, you don't, I would suspect, my opinion is, you don't do that just because it's the easiest thing that you can relate because you've come from a learner background. You're not doing it just because it's what you know. You're not doing it just because that's the discourse you've heard when you're young. I suspect you're doing it for a different reason. You're doing it because of a will to affect in some way. Is that fair enough? Is that correct?
Well, certainly. I mean, one of my pleasures in my own mental processes is making connections between things that connections might not be evident, and oftentimes people see information as something that's like on a shelf rather than something that's part of a supply chain. and I think that there's something about having attention and then using that attention to download good information, is what great teaching is. If you just
is it's a word download, because you're not downloading it. You're kind of you're pushing it into their brain. You're using entertainment and you're using the vehicles of farce and of play to
Trojan horsing it into their brain.
Yeah.
Think about that. There's a lovely quote by a Canadian author, W.O. Mitchell, where he talked about a great teacher palming ideas off into the minds of the students. That years later, the reason would become apparent. Something would happen, and someone would go, "Oh, my teacher told me something about that."
But is this?
And that's like palming it off is a gentle way rather than bombarding people, or you know what I mean. And I think that's.
Well, this is something I'd like to believe I've learned over the years, is that you can't tell someone something, but you can use farce to introduce an idea to their mind.
Yeah, there's satire, farce. One of the great rhetorical devices of someone who truly persuades others. There's a difference between talking in a logical argument and actually changing somebody's minds. And people who are great at persuading oftentimes really are masters of exactly that modality. You're not telling anybody anything. You're setting a table, and then someone comes over and goes, "Oh, this looks good,"
Well, I know this. I'm a rebellious creature. You tell me something, I'm going to tell you to fuck off as an instinct, because like I've kind of built the instinct as a reflex, and I've got to believe that feeling is in some way pervasive between humans. We could talk about this for a long time, and we've already been talking for a long time. So I feel like we've got to get a little bit more surgical. Yeah. So after Edinburgh, you've gone there, and let's be honest, people have not been as kind to you as you should do. Was it a good experience as a whole?
So, I mean, in general, I get to say I was at the Great Edinburgh Fringe Festival. There was some sense of, I met some cool people. I ended up getting a few gigs out of it down the line. I kind of like, I'd have to say, so Edinburgh was there. My next episode was China and Macau, and that was its own kind of reality that now has put me on another thing. I came back to Toronto. I have done a few street things. I was actually hoping
just before
to do street.
Just before, when we went from Edinburgh to China, and you've had the experience of people being kind of dickish to you on the street there, and you've gone to, was there a re-establishing of your position? Did you think, well, street festivals, maybe fuck off, maybe I'll try and do something different now?
I mean, street festivals, again, for me, were important financially from 96 until 98. It was a very small window that I really made money on the street. And Montreal was daily street stuff. I've done a few. I mean, I did Ottawa last year. Now, let's put it this way. Edinburgh made me feel like street performing was not my future home. I'd have to say that I walked away from that going like, whatever else, maybe this is part of my past. It's not so much part of my
Well, I feel sad for that. I feel sad for street performance for that. I honestly do. I feel like our environment should be more welcoming to someone like yourself.
I've moderated it a little bit since. Like I said, I would have. Yeah. That was 2000 and how far back was Edinburgh? 8 or something like that. But,
yeah, it was time ago. It might have been 2008.
So, I mean, at this point, like I said, this summer I would have gone back to the street with my friend Andrew Eland, Magic Man. We were looking at working on a dual act together. And I certainly have no, rule against doing it. And ideally, it's one of my favorite environments to work. And if there's that ideal sort of space for me, there's a bunch of stuff that's happened. I mean, not even weather. The change in weather is something that I'm a sweater, so it's already physiologically uncomfortable for me to perform in heat. But 2, balloons are temperamental in
different temperatures. Too cold, too hot, they change, don't they?
Yeah. So even like Ottawa Basket Festival last year, like I really was restrained a lot in my my repertoire because of weather conditions. So it's one of those things where, I love to keep it as something. And certainly if I was in a strange city that I hadn't been in before, where there was like a nice pitch, one of my favorite experiences of street performing was exactly that. And one of the benefits that comes from being someone like myself who's different, and again, the kind of connections that I made, I was more likely to get invited to come and live with somebody than an average street performer.
Yeah.
I'd have like a deep conversation with someone afterwards. We go out for a dinner or something, and it's funny.
You're not gonna sit at a dinner table and talk to people about edges. You've got more things.
I had a few crazy experiences with one where like literally an uncle of someone, of a 7-year-old, like the mother and father, like just like liked me so much, invited me to live with them. And then the uncle found out, and he was like, "What do you mean you're like letting some like strange guy in the thing?" And the little girl like was like explained to him why it was so cool to have in the house. And then the uncle ended up becoming a friend. But it was like,
but that's traditional. That's a traditional street performance thing. I look at some of the historical writings about traveling performers.
Now this is,
and part of the thing is that they'd say, if you ain't going to make money in a town, you say, hey, I'm a traveling performer, give me bed, give me board, treat me nice, and then I'll go to the next town tomorrow. And you get to spend the night with someone interesting.
The Shaughnessy, the bard, was a guarantee. You know, the Irish bard at the highest level historically had the guarantee of the hospitality of the king.
Is it something like the contemporary thing of the in India they have the sadhus? It's like a sadhu.
Yes, yeah.
It's maybe slightly less spiritual as it's seen in India.
No, I mean, remember that we're talking about Indo-Europeans who have magical cows, and who have like raga. What's a raga? You know, what's a jig? What's a reel? What are these musical forms that are very similar 7-8 times? And there's a lot of similarities. And also, the bard was not just the storyteller; they were also the genealogist, which is also the sadhu. You know, who can marry who, and you know, what's the history, what's the story, so there's something.
What is the appropriate action to take, judged on what has happened before?
Yeah. And back to the idea about hospitality. So the Irish bard had the right of hospitality of kings, and there's a record, some Connor Mac someone or other, you know, and his retinue, not just him. He brought like his retinue. I think the record was 2.5 years or something, where he like shows up at a castle, claims the right of hospitality 2.5 years later, you know.
Time you go. Well, it's incredible. I mean, I talked to Andre Vincent about this, and he talked about the Battle of Hastings, very famous British battle.
Sure,
and apparently the Battle of Hastings only happened because their fool got decapitated. The Conqueror, William the Conqueror's fool, got decapitated, and I think it's weird. I'm conflating historic events, maybe.
Wow.
It's been many moons ago, but one of the fools got decapitated, and because the fool got decapitated, the king was so incensed. He was like, well, no, we're going to go to war, and that was the reason he shot arrows into the camp, which led to the arrow in the eye of the king that died. I'm appearing horribly unknowledgeable at history at this point.
Yeah, it's one of those, I'll go back and look at that. My family's Norman on my mom's side. So. Actually, I'm not. Interesting little historical thing that I found out about myself and my mistakes. So, having known that, you know, William was Norman and speaking French, I always had this like little thing of like, it's Guillaume de Conquérant. It's not William, but it turns out that it actually was William, Norman French.
Well, William was the son of Wilfred, and Wilfred was a Dane. You know, the history goes that the Danish people were reaving the coast of France. And the French king turns around and says, please look after our coast. You can have Normandy. And I mean, we have very long conversations, and although I'd love to, I don't think we should engage in
not into that side
conversations now.
Tie up the street. Yeah. Let's go.
Yes, very much so. So we'll have conversations after the video's over about this stuff. Okay. So you've done this stuff. You've traveled to France, traveled to China after doing Edinburgh. You come back to Canada, and so when you're back in Canada, how is your life evolving? I know you said you've done Ottawa Festival last year, but just generally speaking, after you've gone through this experience, you go to Edinburgh, go to China, what's the life of Sean after this?
Well, I mean, Toronto now, I'm trying to figure out a little bit more, say, product. So working on animation with balloons, working on recording with balloon instruments. This COVID thing is maybe pushing me a little bit more towards an online kind of manifestation.
I have no idea what you mean.
So I'm looking at education with balloons as like a supplement to people who are doing homeschooling. Is one of the things I'm talking about right now with some people.
So you're essentially like you're Barney the Dragon, but with balloons. You're giving something that's accessible to children as a method of learning.
There certainly is stuff like colors and numbers and letters.
And the physicality of balloons has to have something to do with it as well, surely.
It lends itself so nicely. And there's something fun and playful about just the medium itself. And in a way, the one thing I always come back to, like that 2-year-old Chinese kid, I like those human beings better than I like a lot of others. I read something on Facebook today where it was like on Art Attack. You've seen Art Attack, I'm sure. Remember that show?
Yeah, of course I have. Neil Buchanan.
There you go.
Of course I've seen Neil Buchanan.
So we
his
had
magnificent mullet he used to have
on TV Ontario. So it was actually shown here as well. So Canadians know Art Attack, and someone had put down, a quote from one of the fellows' name is, where he said, "Every kid thinks they're Picasso until the age of 6," and I love that. I think that's like, yep. And there's something about giving those little Picassos balloons, and also the lessons that come along with balloons. There are a lot of deep things, that are built into it. Things are impermanent. You can make something way more amazing if we build something together. Because of the nature of balloons, I can't, if I was a Lego artist, for instance, I could do something an hour a day for 6 months and make something amazing. Now, a balloon artist, I can't. I start and I've got, it has to get done within this period. And if it's going to be big, it would be lovely to get more people involved. And then I also love this idea of now here it is. It exists for a certain period of time. It's relevant for a certain phase, and then it's gone.
There was something I heard which was quite nice off JP Koala.
Okay.
JP, everyone knows JP McHenry. He's the hippie juggling legend of the World Festival Circuit.
Axe wound. Oh my god.
Yeah, and he turned around to me when he was talking about balloons, and he said that balloons are a great way to teach children about death. You give them a balloon, and there's a permanence to it. A non-permanence to it, I should say.
There's certainly, and not with a bang or with a whimper, 2 ways balloons go. And then, now this is ecologically forgotten right now, forbidden. Don't release helium balloons into the environment, please. But there is a poignancy to seeing a helium balloon that a kid has lost going up into the sky. That's a third category of loss of balloon. So there's the balloon that you hold on to until it's a little withered mess. There's a balloon that you hold on to and it goes boom, wah. This one's sad. This one's tragic almost. And then there's that balloon that you let go, which is it's like a wah that gets into a whine, and then just some sort of meditation on disappearing.
Well, there's a beautiful sorrow of seeing someone's balloon, like dreams, drift away into the sky, never to be seen again. Maybe they'll land in a different place.
This would have been nice, and like you say, so much to talk about, but actual experience in street performing. But one of the more poignant ones that I had was finishing up at Harbourfront, walking home one day, and there were a group of kids coming out of a children's drop-in center, a teen drop-in center. So we're talking about street kids with kids who had a little party organized for them, and the kids were going out with helium balloons. And I had just by coincidence started a company called the Rising Balloon Company. I had a little business card that was even a test. It wasn't the print, it was just fresh from the printer. And Rising Balloon Company. And I had it in my pocket. I'd saved it all day. I hadn't handed it out. I was going to give it to somebody who could give me some big work and didn't run into that person. But I had this in my pocket, and I'm walking north on Yonge Street, 150 meters south of this kids center. Kids walking out with balloons. La 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 la. And the last kid walks out, and a little kid, the balloon gets carried away by the wind, and I see it all. I see this kid coming out after all these kids smiling, and then the balloon goes up, and the kid just goes, wow. And I had a bag of balloons, and I'm thinking, here I go. I'll just go Rising Balloon Company. Here, I'm going to make a balloon for you. You called me with a rising balloon. It was my idea. The rising balloons sent a message like Batman, and here's the balloon guy to make you the best balloon you've ever gotten. But
you let go of a balloon into the sky, and Balloon Man will appear.
In my head, I was just thinking, I have this card, and what a coincidence, this guy's here. But
almost like a hyper real kind of moment. It all fits together. And
I really but nature interfered with the script because the balloon that had been released was subject to an overdraft from a building, and actually the overdraft, I can retroactively logic it all out. What I'm thinking is that kid got the last balloon. It was the end of the tank, so it wasn't filled so much. That overdraft, was sufficient to start it on a downward trajectory. But I didn't break pace, man. I literally, I just kept walking, and the balloon came into my hands like this. So now I give the kid the balloon back, and I give the father the card, Rising Balloon Company, and to my not to my credit, I insisted on making a balloon for that kid that still in my mind was going to be the greatest balloon that kid ever got.
Well, no, let's say you said not to your credit. To your credit, you made an effort. You made over the effort. You could have walked away.
No. Giving that kid the balloon was the best thing I could have done. Anything done afterwards actually detracted from how special that moment was. That's an artist thing. Sometimes you just, sorry, what you said was just perfect, and now is the time to go. And that's one of my great weaknesses, is I think.
Know when to walk out the door?
Yeah. I might even we're getting towards finishing. So the one time I did that absolutely perfect as a performer, again, it wasn't street, but it was coming back from Yorkville. I had the perfect girlfriend at the time. She lived like 2 blocks away. The street performer without a girlfriend, that was that part of my life. This would have been after this was, my God, this was before the first street festival. Wow, and I learned that lesson, but I've never done it better since. Anyway, to set the stage, I was coming back. There were a bunch of people at a picnic table. She lived in the next door house, and there was like a porch. I'm walking up, and I see all these people, and I just decide to stop and do some balloon tricks for them. And I had invisible thread at that point. I was doing a lot of balloon levitating, and visible thread works better if you can put an attach point, put another attach point, another attach point, and then go boom, and it's like crazy shit. And so I showed up, and I maybe the best turn I've ever done. I played drunk enough that it was, oh, whoops, excuse me, sorry, boom, there's some, I loaded up the whole place, and then was cool enough to show them a trick. And then I've got this thing where I make a balloon float in the middle of the air, and then fly over there, and then fly over there, and then fly back to my hand. It's surreal, right? And it's low lighting, so I was not called on it. Flipped them out. Then I took that ball and I made a balloon spiral that when you talk to the DNA molecule and the sperm and the egg, it's a tour de force. And at this point, I had just blown everybody's mind. Like there's not much more I could do. And I sort of I'm holding this thing, and it's like, what do you do now? You give it to the host, and I was like, pass it around. So I passed it to people, and they took that momentum. They all held it like some kind of sacred object, turning the ball and watching the ball go around, passing it. And while they were passing it around, I noticed out of 3 candles that were on the table, and it was a fairly overcast night, 3 candles that were on the table, 2 of them had gone out. There was only 1 candle left, so very faint light, and it was the one right beside me. And the thing came around the table, and it got to me, right? And then someone looked and handed it back to me, and I just held the spiral. And it was one of those things where sometimes instinct is, you can't do instinct in these moments. I just took it and the flame, and I looked at the flame, and I put it like in such a smooth moment into the flame. Of course, it pops and puts the flame out.
That's the last flame, and now we're in darkness.
And then there's this moment where I'm like, what now? And I know I had thought of this before, but just I went like, get the fuck out of here. Boom! And I ran literally through the front door of this girl I was seeing's place. I got up onto into her place. I went, shh, we have to go to the porch. Shh, be quiet. So go to the porch and left the window open. And literally, I was on the porch with this girl, before anybody noticed that I was gone.
And it was real magic, real magical moment.
They spent the next 25 minutes debating whether or not I was real. Like literally, like there were people who were like, no, you just don't disappear like that. And think of how weird this guy was. Like, he can't be real. Look what he did. Look what he did.
It must have been a hallucination.
He can't be real.
So one of our commenters, Madde, has just said she loved it, and she did say earlier on she wished to have a more detailed discourse on the dildos. And I know you can. I know you have stories. Would you be willing to give?
Do you want a demo?
Well, if you want to do a demo, you can do. This is completely up to you. We're reaching the end of our discourse.
Okay.
I will say it's now. He can't hear me. I could say anything. I could say that he's a. But, no, I'm not going to say anything now. What? So, hey, how you doing? I was going to take advantage of you not hearing me for a brief moment, but you were too quickly to put your things back in. So, all that's watching, now we have a quick demo of how to make a balloon dildo.
Yeah, let's do a little baby here. So, I mean, I can make these with water. You can make them, again, this is a ribbed version. You could do the unribbed one, but that's really technically
for your pleasure. For your pleasure.
Yeah, so I mean, basically, there's one layer of latex into a series of bubbles.
I mean, as you're telling a story, I remember you telling me a story moons ago about the actual the dispensing of these dildos. You went to a certain party where there was a lot of interest, and I don't know if this is a story I should be prompting now, whether you're willing to tell or not.
Pretty fucking hilarious. I did a 10th anniversary for a company called Come As You Are, and they're a co-op, sex store co-op. So,
I sense there's a double entendre going on there. There we go.
So now this would be the tip. So I want it to be smooth there. We'll let air out over here. So at this point, you basically got something that's already quasi-functional. There,
Filth.
But gosh. I think it's important.
I know you're a capable multitasker, so I'm going to get you to do this. While you're doing this, please tell us the story of the story you told me, the dildo dispensing event.
So basically, as you can see, you can build multiple layers on it. But my job was to make custom dildos for all of the guests, or any guests who wanted one. So they were able to tell me ribbed, non-ribbed, this diameter to, whatever, there's a limit, but, this length. Very educational, actually.
How does one find a gig like this?
Well, again, it was just a situation. I was on a strip where I'd done some street performing, so it worked out quite nicely. So basically there I am doing it, but the most hilarious thing about the whole process was there were magic bullets, tiny little dildos, and I was able to put one of these little magic bullets into each of them, like a bubble. So instead of a bubble like this, imagine putting one of the magic bullets inside.
And it's like a vibrating thing, I assume.
It's got a battery inside it.
Yeah.
And so, when I'm putting one at a time in it, I'd put it at the edge, and I'd be able to make it so you could turn it on and off. But there was a particular woman who came into the party. She was, I guess, a paraplegic, and a fairly complicated electric wheelchair, and she was with her lover. And the store owner went, okay, so you're just about done right now. This is one of our favorite customers. She's a hoot. She's gonna love. She wants you to make it. Just understand, she's like a size queen. So
she wants it big.
She wants big. So and look here. Use as many magic bullets as you want, because I guess she bought like a big box of these things. So I had to turn them all on first, because I was wrapping them like 2 and then 3 to make like one unit. It was like,
so you got 3 of these balls like clumped
6
together
magic,
in one.
Yeah. But 3, 6, 9, 12 magic bullets were what ended up going into this fucking thing, and they were all turned on. So funny. But the way that was that there's no way I had to turn them on first. So just what do you describe? And then there's this really funny moment where I was like, even her lover was there, and I'm like, here, maybe you want to turn on a couple of these. It was
is it like an aggressive pyramid? Is that what you've made?
So aggressive pyramid? No. So it didn't get wider. It was actually, a constant circumference.
Cylindrical.
Yeah, it was not quite cylindrical. It was. Now I did use other balloons around it, so it wasn't like quite triangular. Like I did put other balloons in as fill. And it ended up becoming like veiny. It was quite. So you put it. Let's say it was. And when you put it down on on the table, it would like, but it was just one of those funny things where the party's coming to its conclusion. This woman comes in. I do this thing that takes it up a notch. We've got everybody watching. You know what I mean? Again, it's like that Chinese kid. The show is me making someone ecstatically happy. And their reaction is actually way better in some ways than anything I'm actually doing. It's kind of like this funny, nice light on my face there.
Is there a thing of they're vicariously living through her experience of receiving this huge vibrating rubber dildo?
It is let's put it this way: there's what's not to love about this, couple that's just they're so comfortable with something that's so potentially uncomfortable that everything else is is benefits from the blow. They're just too cool. You know what I mean? You can't you just don't get to see a paraplegic woman acting like a sex boss too often. There's something so fucking charming about it. And the balloon guy yes ma'am, yes ma'am. What's not to love, right? And just the finale on it. I got this thing, and I give it to you. I'm gonna finish off here. This is how there's a funny way that you can present the balloon.
Everyone watch the creation.
Yeah. So basically, if I go in here like this, and then I attach it with my finger, like so, and then you can get someone to bite it if they're really sexy, and then you get this got the dildo that's attached on the finger, and then you're like, oh, you want to take the dildo? Oh, sorry, I can't seem to get it off here. I know.
Sean, my laptop is just informed me that I'm going to run out of battery any second now. So you're welcome to talk on after I disconnect. Oh, what a lovely fuck finger you have.
It's giving you the fuck finger, but I've rubbed it with latex, so I've
it's an incredibly overzealous fuck finger. Is there anything you want to say to young performers, particularly as someone who has created original work that you care about? Is there something you want to say to young performers as they try and do the same thing, or perhaps want to encourage them to maybe do the same thing?
Yeah, there definitely is a phase where you've got to just have a little bit of faith in yourself. And again,
this is so bizarre coming after the fuck finger.
You can be too precious in a sense of, there is a feedback loop where you're actually putting your fragile, inspired work out there, and you're not going to get the response you want, but getting used to that a little bit, enjoying yourself. I mean, practice, really, treat it like a discipline in the sense of, you would, if you're a musician, you do chops. And one of the things that I sometimes do forget about myself is how many 1,000 hours I spent doing balloons for myself, in a room, alone, goofing around. And there's a lot of stuff that's impossible. I can't do that. And you're like, oh, no, you're going to figure out some way to do it. So definitely those would be some things. And And I mean, also, there's some kind of responsibility. Human beings, we need to have a lot more people be this kind of person and respect this phase of human existence of where we are all Picassos or think that we are. You know, I really believe
the age of individuality.
There's something about, again, there's the age of ego when you actually have an ego and a personality you seek to defend, but that's not when you're the most interesting. You're more interesting before you're defined as a person much of the time, you know, and you're more interesting when you're redefining your personality. I mean, certainly shtick is shtick, and it does require performance, rehearsal, practice. And
is it that you want to see a human being in flux, though?
I think that there's something about embracing both sides of it, and it's something that I can offer from my over it. It's maybe an example of how to do that innovative thing by sustaining playfulness, by keeping a certain amount of stubbornness, a certain amount of energy, a certain amount of vision, and a certain amount of joy. Yeah, I mean, there's something. If you're not
Sean,
loving what you do,
if you don't, if you don't love what you do, you're in trouble. No. Sean, we're at 2 hours 40 minutes. I'm going to ask this moment. Last things to say, brother. Anything else you want to say to everyone?
Oh, well, I don't know if anyone's actually bearing with it this long. Thanks for that.
100% they have. I can tell you they have. I've been watching. They have.
I really enjoy, I mean, the balloon world that I've got. I think that it is a really successful place to talk about this fragile, inspired, spiritual thing that's impermanent and that's constantly evolving. And I think there's a lot of space in balloon world for other people to come and play. And one of the things that I hope to be doing going forward is this ongoing series, Balloon Land, where I come from a place floating up in the clouds where everything is balloons, and I come down to earth and I take exciting people up. But in my hot air balloon, you can't bring any baggage. So you've got to come up and you've got to play with balloons. So if you're a storyteller or a juggler or a musician, there's some way that we'll find a way for you to play with balloons in Balloon Land. And then the other shoe is me coming back down and trying to take balloons to interact with the art form that exists here on Earth. So,
that sounds like a truly wonderful thing that I would love to see, and I will be sharing with all of you when I have it. It will be on this video as soon as humanly possible. I'm sure we can put your website on there after, which will be linked to that. I'm going to say now, Sean, it's always a pleasure to chat to you, but tonight it's been an absolute joy. It really has. Thank you for sharing your story with us. I'm sure everyone who's been watching would also say the same.
I got sunshine on my face right now, so I'll.
The morning has broken.
I guess, yeah, you're getting into evening time right now. We're just getting towards dinner, and I'm gonna make myself a snack.
The difference: 15 minutes to midnight here. Oh no, 15 minutes to 11 o'clock. Oh,
that's my idea for like a screen fill, so you can like cut out. Does that work?
I see. So is this the point where I stop the?
Yeah, all right.
Sean, I love you. Yeah, for now, much love. Everyone's watching. Thank you for watching. Please, if you're on Facebook, like, join, follow. If you're on YouTube, subscribe, comment, like. Everyone's watching. Thank you. More than anything, Sean, thank you for your time. Absolute joy. Thank you for the weird green void you exist in. I will see you soon, my friend. Everybody else, love you.